We're live. Yay. Okay. Hope it works. Let me check. Yeah. Welcome, everyone, to The Obvious Analogy is with Music, a reading in celebration of the poet Lyn Hejinian, an international reading with many a participant. My name is Ivan Sokolov. I'm a poet and translator from Russia, and I'll be emceeing tonight, this morning, tonight, this event. Today, you will hear Lyn's poetry performed in English by her friends, poet friends, collaborators, publishers, and in world languages by translators who have worked on Lyn's poetry, sometimes for decades, sometimes they've only just begun. There's a nice diversity here in terms of generations as well as languages. And it's a special pleasure for me to announce that we're covering quite a territory from Argentina and Mexico to Paris and Athens to Moscow and even China. And we even have one Italian participant who's currently in Japan. So we're very global. We have a very ambitious program today, so I'll just say, in lieu of introductory words, what I wanted to do was while people are gathering in the audience, I wanted to share with you a few book covers by Lyn published in different languages. Let me share my screen. Yeah, so just a few of those. So you know Lyn's work in the book covers that it came out under in the US or in other Anglophone countries. But this is what Lyn looks like to us, to world readers of Lyn. And these are chronological, but just to skip through a few. Of course, it all began, although he wasn't the first translator, Pierre Alfieri in France. By that time, Lyn had already been translated by Arkady Dragomoshenko into Russian, but this is the first book, as far as I know, in 1992. And then came the translations into Danish, into Swedish, into French again by Martin Richer. And I think the French, the Russian, and the Spanish translations are maybe the most well represented in this selection. Another French translation by Virginie Poitrasson, who will be reading today. A Spanish translation by Pilar Vasquez and Esteban Pujels. I hope Esteban is with us so he can read from this work today. I wanted to point out in particular this translation by Tatiana Lipkis, the Mexican translator, which I think was how it all began, because I found the Chilean edition of this translation that was published in 2019. I found it in Santiago de Chile in 2022, just downtown at a flea market. It was right there. This is the pic I snapped at that moment. And then it kind of occurred to me that, okay, Lyn is everywhere. If Lyn is in Santiago de Chile and Lyn is also in Moscow, then we can maybe find her in different spaces that are between us. More Spanish translations, an Italian translation. There's even a Brazilian Portuguese translation, a Turkish. I just found this last night. There's a Turkish translation of Lyn. More French, beautiful covers, Danish, an Argentinian translation, another French, and the Russian translation, My Life, and the edition of a bilingual edition of the selected works by Lyn, Masks of Motion in Russian and English, that just came out a couple of years ago. I only included here book covers, and I'm going to put the link to this PDF on chat, both on Zoom and on YouTube, so you can flip through them on your own. But there's also, of course, publications of Lyn's poetry in periodicals. This is just the most recent one, the Schreibheft issue in German. That is a double Lyn Hejinian, Rosemarie Waldrop feature. So this is already some this is already a first step towards meeting Lyn, encountering her in different languages, different voices, different tongues. Today, my role here will be, I'll just read one translation, one short poem in the middle of the event, but my role here will be just emceeing and helping people find each other on Zoom. Um, I ask that we please keep the comments to for the end. Let's just first do the reading, and then if we have time, we can stay on for a little while and chat some more, maybe share some reminiscences or memories of Lyn. Our procedure today will be an English poem, then a translation, or an English fragment section chapter written by Lyn. Of course, this could have been a very different event. This could have been a reading where people read their tributes to Lyn. And in fact, there are many of those. I wrote a long poem in memory of Lyn last year, and I've been hearing from others who have been working on different things in tribute to Lyn. Norman Fisher, a poet from the Bay Area, read a tribute of his just last week that some of you here were able to witness to. And that work in particular was a tribute not just to Lyn, but to her last book, Fall Creek. But I've also been hearing from others who've been writing poems in memory of Lyn or in celebration of Lyn. If you wish to share any of those, please drop a link on chat, and I will also forward that to our YouTube viewers. But today we're just doing the originals and the translations. And like I said, most of our reading today will be first English, then the translation, but we'll start off the other way around for a very special reason. First, Lyn herself actually loved this. And whenever she would do anything that involved different languages, she actually liked starting with the translation. But also the poem that you're going to hear is a very particular kind of poem. It's a chapter from her book, Ochota, The Hunt, a short Russian novel. But this particular chapter is itself an appropriation. That chapter is comprised entirely of text originally written not by Lyn Hejinian, but by her close friend and collaborator Arkady Dragomoshenko, the Russian poet. And those were things he wrote in his letters to Lyn, which then Lyn took, sequenced, sampled, reordered, edited, and transformed into a poem. And then Arkady, in his own turn, retranslated or back-translated that into Russian. So this is a poem that maybe doesn't belong to either of them or belongs to both of them, but also lives in some sort of interim space. They themselves would call this the sky of correspondences. That was the title of one of their projects at the time. And we're going to hear, like I said, first the Russian, Arkady's back translation of those lines, read by Alexander Skidan, and then Charles Bernstein will read Lyn's poem for us. Alexander, over to you. Sasha, are you muted? Can't hear you. The sound was just good. Can't hear you now. No, no sound. Mm-mm. Maybe try reconnecting from a different, if you're wearing headphones, maybe switch off the headphones. Oh, maybe now? No, no sound. Okay, why don't we do it? Yeah. Can you say something now, Sasha? Interesting. We kind of lost you. I see your lips move, but I don't hear any sound. Okay, why don't we just go the usual way? And Charles will read the English, and meanwhile, hopefully Sasha will find his sound and then read the Russian for us. Charles, you're on.
Okay. Chapter 109, A Change of Season. And so, in a truly magical manner, it has come about in apparently one continuous morning that I become, he said, the possessor of multitudes of wide open windows and of sunlight tumbling into other minute fissures of an almost invisible brightness. Why not see in this a special meaning? Matter, substance, has become so weightless that it can't absorb damp or accumulate moisture. So the wind carries it soundlessly past the pale jade scales that float between the branches of the blossoming pine and against the outstretched water in the Neva, which, however, feels nothing, reflects nothing. 4 days of warm weather have passed. Can it really be 4? I wanted to discover the reason for the order with which we were born, since there is no discernible order, the moments being so vague as to be impalpable, with which we first begin to think. For me, he continued, in defiance of the laws governing the despondent progressions and movement and alternation of days, no end has broken or bound off the hour in which I returned home and stretched a white cloth over the balcony like a tent, which has been flapping in the wind ever since, for signs of heat, and soon the first tints of humidity will appear. Though the unbearably white sun now hangs immobilized in the strontium turquoise dusty sky, declining imperceptibly toward some boundary which is too speculative to allow one to differentiate anything from anything else, day from night. And night itself now, in any case, is like a cradle, burning in the morning. And should some 10 p.m. arrive, it will fill the room at last with the first rays of humidity, their saffron yellow seething against my pitiful tent, which offers no protection, now abruptly sobbing when the wind suddenly changes direction, until all at once it is blown away and falls into the branches of the trees below the balcony. This reminds me of the joggler who was discovered in a church juggling fruits because he had no other language. A sense of insane optical clarity at all levels alternated with the flashing heat of his hands, moving in a predatory, measured pace towards some materialization that is like language, despite or perhaps because of the intense feelings of uncertainty that touches these objects until they are no longer even necessary. Into that marvelous breach of silence, into the instantaneously growing abyss at the point of maximum stress, gushed something he called happiness. He went on the evening of the first day, I had a splitting headache, he said. I spent the whole night on the balcony anticipating no end to morning or night and no end to my headache, which had turned smooth and straight, like a path leading to some condition which is difficult to explain, but which has nothing in common with time. The next day, I took the metro and then the bus to some nearby lakes, where I stumbled onto an abandoned tennis court behind clusters of wood lilac yellowing amidst fiery blue-gray pine needles. However, there is a danger that life being narrated will turn into an adventure, and every adventure moves inexorably toward resolution. But how can I say that I don't like adventure? I think now of the truly startling antiquity of the sensation that this is happening.
Thanks, Charles. Sasha, take 2. No sound. No sound. Why don't we move on? And then maybe this Russian translation will come to us eventually. Uh, Always something. It's fine. Next up, we're going to hear from Brian Ang who will read a section from one of Lyn's first works, As Thought is the Bride of What Thinking, and then Andrea Raos, the publisher of the Italian translation by Marilena Renta, Gerardo Bortolotti, and Michele Zafano, will read the Italian. Brian?
From Variations, A Return of Words. A characteristic of the morbid intelligence in its manner of thinking is to think backwards from a given thought, to search behind even the most trivial and commonplace thought for its motives and one's own in thinking it, and then to reach again behind that, and again behind that, into the unclear brine of the mind itself. It is a cheerless search. Devastation, or the wreck again. There have been heavy frosts this spring, and the blossoms on the fruit trees have been blackened. The blossoms are black as saints. The ants writhe in the sugar box. Distortion, or error. To err is to wander, or to turn, probably in an unanticipated direction, inadvertently. The mistake is not necessarily without advantage, however, nor, if such should be necessary, irrevocable. Ink, or the guitar. Returning from the middle distances to the same points repeatedly from whatever direction, one homes like a migrant bird or fish. Perhaps that is a function of thought, homing. In any case, one doesn't, perhaps can't, escape one's concerns. That is what constitutes a personal style. Nonsense, or distinctions. The German is ornate in terms of language, the Frenchman in terms of feeling. One can distinguish between the Baroque intellect and the Baroque heart. Explanation, or explication. In one's journal, one need only write a few words, though, on the contrary, it is there, in one's journal, that one tends to be most verbose, where privacy makes occasion for release rather than restraint. There, too, one may experiment with and repeat the shape and sound of old and new ideas. For oneself, however, one may write, say, boot or inclusion, and summon for oneself the cogent images and their array of meanings. For others, however, explanations are due, if not forthcoming. The connection between thought and nonsense is this, that the double is not divisive. Those things which we term opposite ought, by rights, rather to be termed complementary. That is how we term colors, such as orange and blue, or yellow and purple, which stand opposite each other on the artist's color wheel, and serve to highlight each other, intensify each other, and under certain circumstances can be brought to merge into each other. So it is with love and hate, with light and dark. So it is with thought, which when pretentious is nonsense, and when exercised under certain circumstances is absurd. Thought used as analysis risks absurdity. Also definitions of the right way. Now, here is the jolly noon. There is a lilt in telling it. The vision climbs, the response is in retreat. The circle becomes careless as one becomes wary. There is a qua of fleeing geese, while thought is a form of lingering.
Thanks, Brian. Andrea?
Una caratteristica dell'intelligenza morbosa, del suo specifico modo di pensare, è di pensare all'indietro, a partire da un dato pensiero, per cercare anche al di là del pensiero più banale e ordinario, per i suoi motivi e i suoi di chi pensa nel pensarlo, e quindi per arrivare ancora più indietro e ancora più indietro, fino alla torbida salamoia della mente stessa. È una ricerca senza gioia. La devastazione o del rottame ancora. Ci sono state delle gelate fortissime questa primavera e i fiori degli alberi da frutto si sono anneriti. Le formiche si contorcono nella zuccheriera, la distorsione o dell'errore. Sbagliare è errare o svoltare, probabilmente in una direzione inaspettata, inavvertitamente. Lo sbaglio non è necessariamente senza vantaggio, comunque, neppure, se tale deve essere per necessità, irrevocabile. L'inchiostro o della chitarra. Ritornando da distanze medie, agli stessi punti, ripetutamente, da qualunque direzione, si torna a casa, come gli uccelli o i pesci migratori. Forse è una funzione del pensiero tornare a casa. In ogni caso non si riesce, forse non si può, sfuggire alle preoccupazioni. Questo è ciò che costituisce lo stile personale. L'insensatezza o delle distinzioni. I tedeschi sono preziosi in termini di lingua, i francesi in termini di sentimento. È possibile fare distinzione fra intelletto barocco e cuore barocco. Il chiarimento o della spiegazione. Nel proprio diario si possono scrivere anche poche parole, anche se al contrario sia proprio lì nel diario che si tende a essere più verbosi, laddove la riservatezza crea l'occasione per lasciarsi andare più che per trattenersi. Anche qui si può fare esperienza e ripeterla della forma e del suono delle vecchie e delle nuove idee. Per se stessi, comunque, si può scrivere per dire, stivale o inclusione e riassumere a proprio vantaggio le immagini cogenti e la loro schiera di significati. Per gli altri, comunque, bisogna dare delle spiegazioni, se non ci sono prossimi. La connessione tra pensiero e insensatezza è questa, che il doppio non crea divisioni. Quelle cose che definiamo opposte dovrebbero, per la verità, essere definite complementari. È così che definiamo i colori, come l'arancio e il blu o il giallo e il viola, che si collocano uno opposto all'altro nella ruota dei colori dell'artista e servono a darsi luce l'uno all'altro, a intensificarsi l'un l'altro e in certe circostanze possono essere portati a fondersi l'un l'altro. Ed è così con l'amore e l'odio, con la luce e il buio. Ed è così con il pensiero che, quando è supponente, è insensato e, quando viene esercitato in certe circostanze, è assurdo. Il pensiero, usato in quanto analisi, rischia l'assurdità, anche le definizioni nel modo giusto. Ecco l'allegro meriggio. C'è una cadenza nel raccontarlo. La visione si tira su, la risposta è in ritirata. Il circolo perde di finezza quanto più ci si sente esausti. C'è il qua qua delle oche che volano, mentre il pensiero è un modo di attardarsi.
Thank you, Andrea.
Grazie.
Andreas
Anche-
beaming to us from Japan, where it is long past midnight, so I particularly appreciate his contribution. One thing that Lynn gave me, one thing that Lynn gave many of us were connections, were new voices, were new poets. Brian Ang, who just read the English of I Thought It the Bride of What Thinking, was one such poet because she published him, and that's how I found out about him. Another such poet who I got from Lynn was Lindsay Choi, and Lindsay will now start us off on one of the through lines of today's reading, which naturally is going to be my life, Lynn's masterpiece, Lynn's opus magnum, the book that is most translated, the book that is best known. If things work out, we will be moving through my life chronologically. We'll not read all the chapters, but we'll just read a selection. I even thought of prefacing each of the sections in my life with saying how old Lynn was during this chapter, because each of the chapters is set in a particular year of her life. And I mean, we could grow with Lynn, go through these different stages of her life. But then it is also well known that Lynn rewrote that book. She reshuffled and edited those sentences, those passages. So, however asynchronous or skittish and skippy we are today, I think it is completely true to the multitemporal origin in my life. Lindsay Choi will read the English of the opening chapter for us now, and then Tatiana Lipkes will read her Spanish translation.
Thanks so much, Yvonne. What would you think of switching to Lynn's preferred order now? And Tatiana goes first.
Up to you. Tatiana, would you like to start us off with Spanish?
Yes, it's perfect.
Great. Love it.
Okay. Ready? Una pausa, se arroja algo sobre papel. Un momento amarillo, como 4 años después, cuando mi padre regresó a casa de la guerra, el momento de saludarlo mientras estaba al pie de la escalera, más joven, más flaco que cuando se fue, era morado. Aunque los momentos ya no son tan coloridos. En algún lado, al fondo, los cuartos comparten el tapiz de rosas pequeñas. La belleza está en quien la hace. En algunas familias, el significado de necesidad es igual al sentimiento de prenecesidad. Las mejores cosas se reunieron en una pluma. Las ventanas estaban recortadas por cortinas de gasa blanca que nunca se desataron. Con esto me refiero a la irrelevancia, esa rigidez que nunca interfiere. De ahí las repeticiones, libres de toda ambición. La sombra de las secuoyas, dijo ella, era sofocante. La felpa debe desgastarse. En sus paseos, ella cruzaba los jardines de otras personas para robarse pedazos de sus geranios y cactus. Un atardecer ocasional se refleja en las ventanas. Un pequeño charco se nubla. Si tan solo pudieras tocar o incluso atrapar esas grandes criaturas grises. Yo le tenía miedo a mi tío con la verruga en la nariz y las bromas que nos hacía me sobrepasaban y me daba pena la sordera de mi tía, que era su cuñada y quien años antes había caído en el hábito de asentir agradablemente. Estación de lana. Si ves rayos, espera truenos. Muy equivocadamente, como sucedió. Las líneas de tiempo atrás persiguen cada idea, objeto, persona, mascota, vehículo y evento. La tarde sucede, llena de gente y por lo tanto infinita. Más densa, ella estuvo de acuerdo. Era un tic, tenía el hábito y ahora se balanceaba como mi pájaro de plástico al borde de su vidrio, sumergiéndose y retrocediendo del agua. Pero una palabra es un pozo sin fondo. Se embarazó mágicamente y un día se abrió, dando a luz un huevo de piedra, tan grande como una pelota de fútbol. En mayo, cuando las lagartijas salen de las piedras pasan del verde al gris. Cuando la luz del día se va, nos deleita la distancia. Las horas revolvieron nuestros estómagos, como la lluvia de primavera sobre la pendiente de un huerto. Defensas de hule en autos de hule. La resistencia del dormir a estar dormido. En cada país hay una palabra que se acerca al sonido de los gatos para igualar un insacible retrato en las nubes con un estruendo en el aire. Pero el ruido constante no es una señal de música que está por llegar. Todo es cuestión de sueño, dice Cocteau, pero se le olvida el tiburón, que no duerme. La ansiedad está alerta. Tal vez, al inicio, incluso antes de que uno hable, la inquietud ya es convencional, estableciendo el límite incoherente que después separa a los eventos de la experiencia. Encuentra un cajón que no esté lleno. Dormir sumerge nuestro trabajo en la oscuridad. La pelota se perdió en un banco de mirtos. Yo estaba en un cuarto con las características que más tarde podrían volverse nostalgia. Una infancia feliz. Están sentados en sillas de mimbre. Las patas se hundieron desigualmente en la tierra, de modo que cada uno está ligeramente inclinado y sus posturas intentan ajustarse. Las vacas calientan su establo. Las veo rápidamente y da la impresión de que se mueven. Una historia oral sobre papel. Esa mañana, esta, mañana. Lo digo refiriéndome a la psique, porque no hay otra opción. Los matices son una sombra más densa en el cuarto que se caracteriza por su diligencia habitual. Una forma de espera cargada, una asistencia perpetua en la cual pensaba, cuando empecé el párrafo, una buena parte de la infancia se pierde de algún modo esperando.
Beautiful, Tatiana. We're matching. Happy birthday, Lyn. A pause arose, something on paper. The moment yellow, just as 4 years later, when my father returned home from the war, the moment of greeting him as he stood at the bottom of the stairs, younger, thinner than when he had left, was purple, though moments are no longer so colored. Somewhere in the background, rooms share a pattern of small roses. Pretty is as pretty does. In certain families, the meaning of necessity is at one with the sentiment of pre-necessity. Better things were gathered in a pen. The windows were narrowed by white gauze curtains which were never loosened. Here I refer to irrelevance, that rigidity which never intrudes. Hence, repetitions, free from all ambition. The shadow of the redwood trees, she said, was oppressive. Plush must be worn away. On her walk, she stepped into people's gardens to pinch off cuttings from their geraniums and succulents. An occasional sunset is reflected on the windows. A little puddle is overcast. If only you could touch, or even catch those great gray creatures. I was afraid of my uncle with a wart on his nose, or of his jokes at our expense which were beyond me, and I was shy of my aunt's deafness, who was his sister-in-law, and who had years earlier fallen into the habit of nodding agreeably. Little station, see lightning, wait for thunder. Quite mistakenly, as it happened. Long timelines trail behind every idea, object, person, pet, vehicle, and event. The afternoon happens, crowded and therefore endless. Thicker, she agreed. It was a tick, she had the habit, and now she bobbed like my toy plastic bird on the edge of its glass, dipping into and recoiling from the water. But a word is a bottomless pit. It became magically pregnant and one day split open, giving birth to a stone egg almost as big as a football. In May, when the lizards emerged from the stones turned gray from green. When daylight moves, we delight in distance. The waves rolled over our stomachs like spring rain over an orchard slope, rubber bumpers on rubber cars, the resistance on sleeping to being asleep. In every country is a word which tempts the sound of cats, to match an isolable portrait in the clouds to a din in the air. But the constant noise is not an omen of music to come. Everything is a question of sleep, says Cocteau, but he forgets the shark, which does not. Anxiety is vigilant. Perhaps initially, even before one can talk, restlessness is already conventional, establishing the incoherent border which will later separate events from experience. Find a drawer that's not filled up. That we sleep plunges our work into the dark. The ball was lost in a bank of myrtle. I was in a room with the particulars of which a later nostalgia might be formed, an indulged childhood. They are sitting in wicker chairs, the legs of which have sunk unevenly into the ground, so that each is sitting slightly tilted, and their postures make adjustments for that. The cows warm their own barn. I look at them fast, and it gives the illusion that they're moving. An oral history on paper. That morning, this morning. I say it about the psyche because it is not optional. The overtones are a denser shadow in the room, characterized by its habitual readiness, a form of charged waiting, perpetual attendance, of which I was thinking when I began the paragraph. So much of childhood is spent in a manner of waiting.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, Tatiana. Next up, Jane Gregory and Virginie Poitranson will read a selection from Slowly in English and in Virginie's French translation. Jane.
More northward than westward Without cease to my left withdraws what earlier to my right rose. I have observed this gradually. I don't know that I've gently noted what's been turned over. I know there's been a loading of the light with darkness, and then a loading of the dark with light. And to the forces at work tediously at both, I've felt kindly. But kindness, though it requires enormous energy, may be a mark of laziness. No one telephones harshly to challenge one's acts of kindness if those acts exhibit kindness toward them. We carry disillusionment a certain distance and come to the screen. My wall is projected. Finding the door, I choose it and am exposed. That's all freedom is. The choices required of one summing one up. We get evening audibly, a drawing slowly, and all that is new is an interdependence, if it's to be considered. Undeniably, it could not be considered, but consideration is what I, at this juncture, don't want to deny. You don't have to take off your shoes to request something of the floor. But if there are ripples, all levels of gray, it's perhaps not the floor, but the rising departure over the dunes of a flood, deserving commentary, that must be brooked either by boats whose shadows are shaken or by configurations of pebble and industry undertaken with abandon. Abandon is not something to abandon.
Virginie, you're muted.
Au nord, plutôt qu'à l'ouest, sans cesse à ma gauche se retire ce qui s'est levé plus tôt sur ma droite. Je l'ai observé progressivement. Je ne sais pas si j'ai noté sans forcer ce qui a été remplacé. Je sais qu'il y a eu un chargement de la lumière par l'obscurité, puis un chargement de l'obscurité par la lumière, et que j'ai bien aimé les forces travaillant péniblement pour les deux. Mais la bienveillance, bien qu'elle demande une grande énergie, peut être un signe de paresse. Personne ne téléphone brutalement pour défier les actes de gentillesse d'un autre si ces actes montrent de la gentillesse envers eux. Nous transportons la désillusion à une certaine distance et allons vers l'écran. Mon mur est projeté. Trouvant la porte, je la choisis et suis exposée. Voilà ce qu'est la liberté. Les choix exigés par quelqu'un le résument. Nous atteignons distinctement le soir, lentement un dessin, et tout ce qui est nouveau est une interdépendance si cela doit être pris en considération. Indéniablement, cela ne pouvait être pris en considération, mais la considération est ce qu'à cette jonction je ne veux pas rejeter. Tu n'as pas besoin d'enlever tes chaussures pour demander quelque chose au sol. Mais s'il y a des clapotis, tous les niveaux de gris, ce n'est peut-être pas le sol, mais le départ imminent au-delà des dunes d'une inondation digne de commentaires, qui doit être subie soit par les bateaux dont les ombres sont tremblées, soit par les configurations du galet et de l'industrie livrée à l'abandon. L'abandon n'est pas quelque chose à abandonner.
Merci. We had from Slowly, now back to My Life with Kit Robinson and the Polish translation by Eva Chrushil. Kit, you're muted.
Sorry about that. What is the meaning hung from that depend? A dog bark, the engine of a truck, an airplane hidden by the trees and rooftops. My mother's childhood seemed a kind of holy melodrama. She ate her pudding in a pattern, carving a rim around the circumference of the pudding, working her way inward toward the center, scooping with the spoon to see how far she could separate the pudding from the edge of the bowl before the center collapsed, spreading the pudding out again, lower, back to the edge of the bowl. You could tell that it was improvisational because at that point they closed their eyes. A pause, a rose, something on paper. Solitude was the essential companion. The branches of the redwood trees hung in a fog whose moisture they absorbed. Lasting. What might be? Its present, a future, like the life of a child. The greatest solitudes are quickly strewn with rubbish. All night the radio covered the fall of a child in a valley down an abandoned well fitting, a clammy, narrow pipe 56 feet deep, in which he was wedged, recorded, and died. Stanza there. The synchronous, which I have characterized as spatial, is accurate to reality, but it has been debased. Daisies plenty pebbles in the gravel drive. It is a tartan, not a plaid. There was some disparity between my grandfather's reserve, the result of shyness and disdain, and his sense that a man's natural importance was characterized by bulk, by the great depth of his footprint in the sand. In other words, a successful man was no lightweight. A flock of guard geese are pecking in a cold rain, become formal behind the obvious flower's bloom. The room, in fact, was used as a closet as well, for as one sat at the telephone table, one faced a row of my grandparents' overcoats, raincoats, and hats, which were hung from a line of heavy, polished wooden hooks. The fog burned off, and I went for a walk alone, then was lost between the grapevines, unable to return, until they set a mast, a pole, into the ground, and hung up a colored flag that I could see from anywhere around. A glass snail was set among real camellias in a glass bowl upon the table. Pure duration, a compound plenum in which nothing is repeated. Photographed in a blue pinafore. The way Dorothy Wordsworth often, I think, went out to get a sight. But language is restless. They say there has been too much roughhousing. The heat waves wobbled over the highway. On either side were flat brown fields tilted slightly toward the horizon, and in the distance, ahead of the car, small blue ponds lay in our path, evaporating subtly, as if in a single piece, at the instant prior to our splashing in. I saw a line of rocks topped by a foghorn protecting the little harbor from the tide. Fruit peels and the heels of bread were left to get moldy. But then we'd need, what? A bird to eat the fleas from the rug. When what happens is not intentional, one can't ascribe meaning to it, and unless what happens is necessary, one can't expect it to occur again. Because children will spill food, one needs a dog, rubber books for bathtubs, coast laps. One had merely to turn around in order to see it, elbows off the table. The portrait, a photograph, had been made so that my grandmother was looking just over the head of the observer into a little distance, not so far as to be a space into which she might seem to be staring, but at some definite object, some noun, just behind one. Waffle men everywhere. She had come upon a set of expressions, peachy being one of them, and nuts to you another, which exactly suited her. And so, though the expressions went out of everyone else's vocabulary, even years later, when everyone else was saying far out and that's nowhere, she continued to have a perfectly peachy time on her vacation. This was Melody Ranch, daring and resourceful. As for we who love to be astonished, we might go to the zoo and see the famous hippo named Bubbles. The side saddle was impossible, and yet I've seen it used successfully, even stunningly. The woman's full skirt spread like a wing as the horse jumped a hurdle and they galloped on. Lasting. Ferries. Later, trolleys from Berkeley to the bridge. This is one of those things which continues, and hence seems important, and so ever what one says, over and over again. Soggy sky, which then dries out, lifting slightly, turning white, and then banks toward the west. If I see fishing boats, that's the first thing I think. Insane in a common parlance.
Jakie jest znaczenie zawieszone na tym zależy? Warkot psa, silnik ciężarówki, samolot ukryty za drzewami i dachami. Dzieciństwo mojej mamy było swojego rodzaju świętym melodramatem. Jadła budyń według wzoru, rzeźbiąc krawędź wokół jego obwodu, przedostając się od wewnątrz do środka, wydrążając łyżeczką, żeby sprawdzić, jak daleko może oddzielić budyń od brzegu miseczki, zanim zapadnie się środek, rozciągając go znowu na zewnątrz, niżej, z powrotem do brzegu miseczki. Można powiedzieć, że to było improwizacyjne, bo na tym etapie mieli zamknięte oczy. Przerwa, róża, coś na papierze. Samotność była niezbędną współtowarzyszką. Gałęzie sekwoi zawisły we mgle, której wilgotność wchłonęły. Nieprzemijające, co ma być, jego teraźniejszość, przyszłość, jak życie dziecka. Największe samotności są szybko zasypane śmieciami. Przez całą noc radio relacjonowało o dziecku, które wpadło do porzuconej, wąskiej i oślizłej rury, głębokiej na 17 metrów i zaklinowane w niej zmarło. Tam zwrotka. Synchroniczność, którą scharakteryzowałam jako pojemność, dobrze oddaje rzeczywistość, lecz została zdeprecjonowana. Kopa kamyków, stokrotki na podjeździe żużlowym. To szkocka krata, a nie materiał w kratkę. Istniała pewna niewspółmierność pomiędzy rezerwą mojego dziadka, efektem jego nieśmiałości i pogardy oraz jego przekonaniu, że naturalna ważność człowieka zależała od jego rozmiaru, od tego, jak głęboko odciskał ślad w piasku. Innymi słowy, człowiek sukcesu nie był wagi lekkiej. Gromadka gęsi zbożowych podziobuje w zimnym deszczu, staje się formalna z tyłu za oczywistym kwieciem. Pokój służył w zasadzie za garderobę, gdyż siedząc przy stoliku pod telefon można było zobaczyć rząd płaszczy dziadków, płaszczy przeciwdeszczowych, kapeluszy zawieszonych na ciężkich, wypolerowanych drewnianych hakach. Mgła wypaliła się i wybrałam się na spacer sama, po czym zgubiłam się pośród winorośli i nie byłam w stanie wrócić, aż wystawili maszt, kijek wbity w ziemię z zawieszoną kolorową flagą, którą mogłam zewsząd zobaczyć. Szklany ślimak ustawiony był pomiędzy prawdziwymi kameliami na stole w szklanej wazie. Czyste trwanie, złożone plenum, w którym nic się nie powtarza, sfotografowane w niebieskim fartuchu. Tak jak Dorota Wordsworth, jak myślę, wychodziła często, żeby zaczerpnąć widoku. Lecz język nie zaznaje spokoju. Podobno było za dużo burd. Fale gorąca chybotały nad autostradą. Po obu stronach jawiły się płaskie, brązowe pola nachylone lekko ku horyzontowi, a w oddali przed naszym samochodem widniały błękitne, drobne sadzawki, wyparowujące gwałtownie, jakby w jednej cali i tuż przed naszym wpluśnięciem. Ujrzałam molo zwieńczone latarnią morską, osłaniające małą przystań od fal. Obierki i piętki szły na spleśnienie. Lecz potem potrzebowaliśmy ptaka, żeby wyłuskał pchły z chodnika. Kiedy zdarzenia są niezamierzone, nie można im przypisywać znaczenia i nie można oczekiwać ich powtórzenia, no chyba, że jest w nie wpisana konieczność. Ponieważ dzieci rozlewają jedzenie, potrzebny jest pies. Gumowe książki do kąpieli. Falowanie wybrzeża. Wystarczyło zaledwie się odwrócić, żeby to zobaczyć. Łokcie ze stołu. Portret fotograficzny skomponowany tak, że moja babcia spozierała ponad głową widza w dal, choć nie tak oddaloną w przestrzeń, gdzie by się wpatrywała, lecz raczej w jakąś konkretną rzecz, jakiś rzeczownik, tuż za nami. Wszędobylskie budki z goframi. Natknęła się na grupę wyrażeń, chociażby gitowy lub spływaj, które jej spasowały i choć okazały się staromodne, nawet lata później, kiedy każdy mówił odjazd bądź do kitu, ona wciąż miała git na wakacjach. Takie było Melody Ranch, śmiałe i zaradne. Co do nas, którzy pragną zadziwienia, być może wybierzemy się do zoo, żeby zobaczyć słynnego hipopotama zwanego chmurką. Siodło damskie było bez szans, choć widziałam je w użyciu i to zadziwiającym. Spódnica kobiety rozpostarta jak skrzydło podczas galopu i przeskoku przez płotki. Niezatarte promy, potem trolejbusy z Berkeley do mostu. To są jedne z tych rzeczy, które trwają, więc zdają się wieczne, gdyż powtarza się je bez końca. Mokre powietrze, które potem wysycha, podnosząc się lekko, bieląc się, a potem spiętrzając się ku zachodowi. Jeśli widzę kutry rybackie, jest to pierwsza rzecz, którą myślę. Obłędne w mowie potocznej.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Kit. Also, happy birthday, Kit. It's a wonderful day when Lyn Hejinian, Kit Roberson, and also Kathleen Frumkin, another Bay Area poet, share the birthday. So we celebrate all three in a way today. Next up, Ray Armantrout and Maria Malinovskaya will read a little fragment from The Book of a Thousand Eyes. Maria will read her Russian translation. Ray, can you read the English?
Yes. I am talking, caressing, crooning, but I can't calm the gaunt brown horse on the platform at the top of the tall wooden tower. It is lying on its side, thrashing. Its legs are very long, the knees knobby and writhing. Its neck is long too, and the expression on its face is one of total despair. It fights to get free. I am holding it around the neck. Then I grab at its legs to keep it from throwing itself off the tower. But I am thinking that perhaps now I should let it go, as there's no consoling it.
Я уговариваю, глажу, баюкаю, но не могу успокоить тощую коричневую лошадку на верхнем этаже высокой деревянной башни. Она лежит на боку, дергается, ноги очень длинные, колени узловатые, извивается, шея тоже длинная, а на морде бесконечное отчаяние. Она брыкается, чтобы освободиться. Я держу ее за шею, потом хватаю за ноги, чтобы не дать ей броситься с башни, но думаю, что, возможно, теперь я должна отпустить ее, потому что ей нет утешения. Thank you and happy birthday to all birthday boys and girls.
Indeed. Thank you, Masha. Thank you, Ray. I'm not seeing Esteban Pujals on Zoom. Maybe he's here under a different alias. Esteban, if you're here, please say something. Meanwhile, let's hear from Juliana Spahr, who will read a section from My Life. And this is also a special moment for me because Juliana is the author of what I think is one of the most helpful articles on my life. Juliana.
She showed the left profile, the good one. A man is tall, a mountain is high, the sky's a limit. Spahr was flat, the filled valleys made shorter hills, which we crested on snowshoes on snow over fences. It seemed that we had hardly begun and we were already there. Personal, obliged, running down. At the time, I saw my life as a struggle against my fate, that is my personality. She was trapped in the elevator, panting and plenty of air. Wounded by gossip's rat-a-tattle. More than horsework on worse hills. On a scroll in the case of sequence of plump wrestlers resembled stages in the development of the blooms on the snapdragons. We were driven indoors by the bees. Each time we entered the metro in Paris, I read the small sign which reserved the large facing double seats nearest the door for soldiers and veterans, crippled by war. And it was just that small sign that realized for me the place name and its history. Writing maybe held it separated there to see. When you open a letter, you do hope for a check. A pause, a rose, something on paper. Ducks, eggs taste eggier. One form of shyness is characterized by the fear of making someone else feel awkward or embarrassed, a kind of heightened sensitivity, or extreme empathy. Religion is a vague lowing. I often felt jittery and took long walks, trying to get a long way from what I felt. Ring, plunge, reappear, Bucephalus, traveler, creatures carrying history. Just offshore, she saw 7 whales and then 10 leaping from the water and rolling into it again. As for we who love to be astonished, so do all relationships move. You have to take on the role of pack leader with your dog. We're in downtown, the lights ahead, out of the blue, a tiny red rocking horse, a plaything, bright and sweet. Any photographer will tell you the same. We took along a loaf of Wonder Bread for the ducks. I have learned to be suspicious of those sudden and spontaneous acts of generosity, for it was in such a mood that I gave away the little wicker rocking chair, which had been mine throughout my childhood and had belonged to my mother before that, immediately regretting the gesture so much that I couldn't bring myself to ask for its return, since I couldn't do so casually and without resentment, a resentment for which I felt guilty, selfish, embarrassed. There is no greater temptation than that of the reminiscence. What memory is not a gripping thought? She was born with that stubborn temperament, and it was shaped the particular seriousness by virtue of which she has carried out her intentions. A spiral in the shape of a progression of circles. This myopia might serve to dispel the pains of chronophobia. The obvious analogy is with music. Thought it through and through, the inaccuracy and then the accessibility of the meaning intrigued me all the more, since I couldn't read the single letters. If that is what they were, the little marks which constitute Persian, mother, dimension, sex, she observed that detail minutely, as if it were botanical, as if words could unite an ardent intellect with the external material world. Listen to the drips, the limits of personality. It's in the nature of language to encourage and in part to justify such Faustian longings, break them up into uncounted, continuous, and voluminous digressions. The very word diary depresses me.
Thanks, Juliana. Esteban, one last call for Esteban. Oh, maybe not. Some other time. And there are so many translators who are not here on this Zoom call and during this reading with us today. Some, like Esteban, just didn't make it. Others, like Esteban's partner in translation, his co-author, Pilar Vasquez, his wife with him, right, has passed away. And there are others, like I said, of whom I don't even know. But next up is Ed Roberson and Panos Bosnakis, who will read a little piece from Redo, and Ed will read the English and Panos the Greek.
Agreement swerves a sonnet to the consonants, sparrows, as a wind blows over the twigs of a rough nest entered by a bird that impales a vowel on its beak. When unable to think of two things unless we think twice, the rower in the water jerks to travel. Her autobiography is 90% picaresque. While thus moralizing, all we have done is shout the name of someone we know. In the intellectual water, the rattling sweaters and the fluffy rocks seem to be wheezing in the wind. As a child, so simple with sincerity, I found it unbearable to have friends while inhibited with sympathy. I had them. Some were A, aggressive and beloved, B, consistently contradictory, or C, casual and splay, like raffia. With a Freudian sense of fun, we felt remorse for our most aggressive howdies. But given fire, the discovery of water was inevitable. Clouds amass like the glaze on clay. Buttery birds collect in the glossy sky. The fat moon coming our way looms out and slides. Anarchies sleep in this overabundance of time like inert technicalities. A nameless crowd, I wonder whose, reminds me of unmortared memory, masonry. Tomorrow is the same day in my experience, but sleep can only give us the pleasure of pleasure, generous if we're awake.
Thanks, Ed. Panos, are you here? Panos Bosnakis. Did we lose our Greek translator? Anyone knows Greek? In that case, maybe Panos will return, and for now we'll continue with Ridu. Barrett Watten will read another poem from Ridu, and then the Chinese translator of Lyn Hejinian will read his version.
Ridu 2. Nostalgia is the elixir drained from guilt. I've been writing. With the fingers of my non-writing hand, I patted the dashboard. Hi, car. It responded, hello, mommy. The city is uncar-like. She who had lived all her life in the city and absorbed all its laws in her blood, madness, really, she waited for the light to change and stepped into the traffic on red. Objects always flicker. Rains threaten, but what can it do? Knocking, buzzing, sloshing, somewhere between empty and full. The excitement is mental, internal, as they remain urgently still. We have stayed in the city, over which it is really raining. Reflections water the gardens. The fields that pressed in the passing, landscapes were immobilized by trees. Uneven, individual, glowing. The photograph craves history. The automobile drove to the photograph. It faces me as I awake.
Thanks, Barrett. Jungbo.
Okay, I'm here. 乡愁是从内疚中汲取的万灵药。我一直用不握笔的那只手的手指书写。我轻拍仪表盘，嘿，汽车。他回应：你好，妈妈。城市毫无车的模样，他的一生都住在城里，把他的所有律法都吸进血液里，真是疯狂。他等待交通灯变绿，并在红灯时踏入车流。物体总在闪耀，欲发出威胁却无能为力。它敲打着，嗡鸣着，泼溅着，在空虚和充实之间的某处。激动是心理层面内在。当他们留在急切的沉寂中，我们一直留在这座的确在下雨的城市里。倒影浇灌着花园，田野挤压在掠过的风景中，被树木固定住。参差不齐的个体在发光，照片渴求历史，汽车驶向照片。当我醒来，它正对着我。Thank you.
Thank you, Jungbo. Next, we return to my life, and we will hear from Jean Day, a poet and friend of Lyn's, and the Serbian translation will be read by Dubravka Đurić, a poet, a critic, but also one of whom I knew many years ago because she once published an interview with Lyn that Lyn included in the Language of Inquiry. And that interview was also then translated into Russian. One of my first encounters with Lyn was in this interview. by Dubravka. Jean?
I'm noticing that I'm reading from the first edition, the Burning Deck edition, and it is different from all the other readings so far from my life have more sentences.
Yeah.
So I hope that this is not a problem with hearing Dubravka's translation. It was only a coincidence. The tree rows in orchards are capable of patterns. What were Caesar's battles, but Caesar's prose? A name trimmed with colored ribbons. We took a trip as if that were part of the baggage we carried. In other words, we took our time. The experience of a great passion, a great love, would remove me, elevate me, enable me at last to be both special and ignorant of the other people around me, so that I would be free at last from the necessity of appealing to them, responding to them. That is, to be nearly useless, but at rest. There were cut flowers in vases and some arrangements of artificial flowers and ceramic bouquets. But in those days, they did not keep any living houseplants. The old fragmentary texts, early Egyptian and Persian writings, say, or the works of Sappho, were intriguing and lovely, a mystery adhering to the lost lines. At the time, the perpetual Latin of love kept things hidden. It was not his fate to be as famous as Segovia. Nonetheless, I wrote my name in every one of his books. My grandmother had been a great beauty, and she always wanted cards. As for we who love to be astonished, the ear is less active than the eye. The artichoke has done its best, armored with scales, barbed, and hiding in its interior the soft hair so aptly called the choke. I suppose I had always hoped that, through an act of will and the effort of practice, I might be someone else, might alter my personality and even my appearance, that I might in fact create myself. But instead, I found myself trapped in the very character which made such a thought possible and such a wish mine. Any work dealing with questions of possibility must lead to new work. In between pieces, they shuffled their feet, the white legs of the pear trees protected from sun. The puppy is perplexed by the lizard, which moves but has no smell. We were like plump birds along the shore, unable to run from the water. Could there be swans in the swamp? Of course, one continues to write, and thus to be a writer, because one has not yet written that ultimate work. Exercise will do it. I thought that for a woman, health and comfort must come after love. Any photographer will tell you the same. So I wouldn't wear boots in the snow nor socks in the cold. Shufflers scuff. That sense of responsibility was merely the context of the search for a lover, or rather for a love. Let someone from the other lane in. Each boat leaned toward us as it turned, and we, pretending to know more than we did, identified each class as it was blown by. Politics gets wider as one gets older. I was learning a certain geometry of purely decorative shapes. She showed the left profile, the good one, what she felt she had heard as a girl. The point of the foghorns is that you can't seed them, need to hear them. She disapproved of background music. And happy birthday, Kit and Kathleen.
Yes. Dubravka? She was here. Ah, interesting. Translators fall off like parts of a rocket. Is that true? Dubravka, if you're here, please come in. Interesting. These are the mysterious ways of poetry. I'm sure Dubravka will come back. I've been in touch with her this morning. And then we'll hear the Serbian translation, hopefully. Or maybe something else. I don't know. But something that Jean was saying maybe is worth commenting on. The fact that My Life may be one of the most protean books in modern history, a book that Lyn kept rewriting. in a way, maybe some would say, some would have it, a life that the author kept rewriting. The book first came out in that edition that Jean was showing, the Burning Deck edition, which had, 37 parts, each consisting of 37 sentences, because Lyn was 37 years at the time, 37 years old. And then later in 1987, she revised the book, including now 45 parts, each consisting of 45 sentences. Now, the beautiful moment about that idea, I think, is that if you think she just added sentences at the end of each section, you're wrong. She inserted them, and I saw this. If you compare the text, she inserted them in different moments of the text, such that they still cohere, they will not cohere, or make sense musically or visually. But it's not as if she just lashed on a new ending to each chapter. No. And then the book was again extended. The life continued in 2002 with the publication of My Life in the 90s. So in a way, I think these translations continue what Lyn herself was continuing. And then she also wrote that little essay called What is Missing from My Life, which came out in Allegorical Moments. That's where you can find it. Today, Lyn would turn 84. Maybe we should write a poem consisting of 84 chapters, each consisting of 84 sentences, or just read 84 translations. But before we lose our minds completely and do that, one last call for Dubravka. I think Dubravka is now on call.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I just filled the space for you.
Yes, something is disconnected me, so I apologize.
We can hear you now.
Yes, you can. Thank you.
Can't see you, so if you have a camera, you can turn it on.
I will. Here you are. Ok. Bila je to slučajna podudarnost. Redovi drveća u voćnjacima mogu oblikovati šare. Šta su se zanove bitke, ako ne njegova proza, ime ukrašeno obojenim vrpcama. Pošli smo na put i poneli ga, kao da je bio deo našeg prtljaga. Drugim rečima, pronašli smo vreme. Pokrenuo bi me, uzdiglo, iskustvo velike strasti, velike ljubavi. Mogla bih da budem posebna i da zanemarim ljude oko sebe. Ne bih morala da im se obraćam, ni da im govorim. Ne bih bila korisna, ali bih bila mirna. U vazama se nalazilo ubrano cveće, aranžirano veštačko cveće i keramički buketi, ali oni nisu tada gajili osobne biljke. Oštećeni stari tekstovi, recimo rani egipatski i persijski spisi ili sapfirni radovi, bili su zagonetni i ljupki. Misterija se pripisivala izgubljenim redovima. Tada je većina latinski ljubavi još uvijek skrivao stvari. Nije mu bilo suđeno da bude slavan kao Segovija, pa ipak sam upisala svoje ime u sve njegove knjige. Jezik je istorija koja mi je darovala oblik i hipohondriju. Poprativši je datumom kao svojim imenom. Uzela sam knjigu i istorijski, s obzirom na datum, kontekstualizovala njene sadržaje. Dodala im čitanje, a sećanju zid. Moja baka je bila lepotica i uvek je pobeđivala na kartama. A kada smo u pitanju mi koji volimo da se zapanjimo, oko nam je aktivnije od uha. Artičoka je bogato rodila, obavijena ljuskama, bodljama, unutrašnjosti skriva meke dlake koje prikladno zovemo čoka. Pretpostavljam da sam se uvek nadala da bih voljom i napornim radom mogla postati neko drugi, da bih mogla izmeniti svoj karakter pa i izgled, da bih u stvari mogla stvoriti sebe, ali umesto toga uhvatila sam se u zamku karaktera koji je omogućio takvu misao, a tu želju učinio mojom. Svaki rad koji se bavi pitanjima mogućnosti mora dovesti do novog rada. Između delova vukli su noge. bela, debla, kruške, zaštićena od sunca. Molim te, zamisli morbidnu kratkovidost, gušter u pokretu bez mirisa zvunjuje štene. Ličili smo na utovljene ptice na obali. Nismo mogli da istrčimo iz vode. Možemo li labudove naći u močvari? Naravno, čovek i dalje piše kako bi postao pisac, jer još nije napisao svoje glavno delo. Vežba će mu to omogućiti. Umećemo opis teskobne jutarnje svežine proleća, kada miris hladne prašine klica pokošene trave, mlade trave, školskih knjiga i trulih jabuka, što dopire kroz prozor otvoren, prati udaljeni zvuk aviona i jato vrana. Mislila sam da ljubav ženi mora biti na prvom mestu, a zatim dolaze briga o zdravlju i udobnost. Svaki će ti fotograf to isto reći. Ne bih nosila čizme po snegu ni čarape kada je hladno. Prevrtljivci prevrću. Osjećanje odgovornosti je bilo samo kontekst u potrazi za ljubavnikom ili pre za ljubavlju. Propusti nekog iz druge trake. Svaki se čamac naginjao prema nama dok se okretao, a mi smo, pretvarajući se da znamo više nego što znamo, identifikovali svaku klasu dok je duvalo. Čovek stari, a politika je sve uticajnija. Učila sam o izvesnoj geometriji čistih dekorativnih oblika. Model forme se može zasnovati na kristalu ili na plućima. Pokazala je levi profil, onaj koji dobro izgleda. O ovome čega je svesna saznala je kada je bila devojčica. Sirene za maglu ne možeš videti. Moraš ih čuti, zahvaljujući koštici više nego kostima. Matematika gomile čini da ih primećujemo. Maja 1959. čitanje nije bilo anonimno. Negodovalo je zbog muzike u pozadini. Negodovala je zbog muzike u pozadini. Hvala. Thank you.
Oh, wow, Dubravka, that was stunning.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one thing that I wanted to mention is what a joy it is to hear Lyn in different tongues, but also in different voices right now. It's like I think I've now discovered a few different Lyns than the one I thought I knew. Thank you, Tatiana, Virginie, Masha, Yeva, Dubravka. Something really interesting. I even wonder whether we think that Slavic languages or Romance languages fit better. These are different directions to keep thinking along. Meanwhile, on to newer translations, more recent translations, in particular the translations in German that have only just begun, thanks to the curation and the work by Norbert Lange and Sonja von Brocke. We'll now hear from Norbert reading a poem from The Unfollowing, and the English will be read by Claire-Marie Stancek. Claire.
The Unfollowing 7. To begin with, I am faced with mountains to circumambulate, since I can't cut through them. I enter the folds of a human adventure. On every door there hangs a figurehead, and this one comes to face me as the door swings shut. I will proceed with goodwill, the best of wills, anxiously, bird of daughters, bird flying from the forks, the blurbs, the cereals, the time I saw a golden tadpole eating apple jam. I saw a sudden whirlpool sucking down a ham. The boughs grown with fruit, an apple false alarm. It's a non sequitur that, since data sinks, the muscles give out mid-word, and a thief stutters while accusing me, his uncle, of theft. Loon comes along, mounted on a beast called That, who is neither more nor less than a horse as obedient to Loon as the tides are to the moon. Shot of men hurrying toward each other at an intersection with open umbrellas, none willing to give way to the others. Shot of placid camels kneeling near a chained dog. Shot of sugar maples temporarily obscured by falling snow. Tomorrow morning, unless things vastly improve, I'll go in person to the front of the caravan and take it over the mountain. I thought I saw an earthworm stirring in the dirt. Then I saw it was a sadist wielding a quirt.
Die Ungefolgschaft. Gleich zu Beginn vor Bergen mich sehen, die ich umrunden muss, denn gehen kann ich nicht durch sie hindurch. Ich steige in die Falten eines Menschenabenteuers. An jede Tür gehängt ist ein Strohmann, und dieser, so wie die Tür ins Schloss fällt, stößt mich mit der Nase darauf. Ich fahre fort mit gutem Willen, dem besten aller Willen. Bang. Töchtervogel, Vogelflüchter der Gabeln, Schmierereien, rein der Zeit. Ich sah eine goldene Kaulquappe beim Verspeisen von Apfelgelee. Ich sah einen jähen Strudel beim Verschlingen von Schinken. Früchte schwer stöhnen die Äste auf. Ein Apfel fällt. Falscher Alarm. Ein Non sequitur ist's. Das Sinnen, Eindrücke sinken. Die Muskeln versagen mitten im Wort. Und ein Dieb stottert, während er mich, den Onkel, beschuldigt, Diebstahl zu begehen. Lyn kommt herbei, aufgesessen einem das genannten Tier, das weder mehr noch weniger als Ross für Lyn Kirre ist, wie es für den Mond die Wolken sind. Ablichtung von Männern, die in einer Kreuzung mit geöffneten Schirmen aufeinander zueilen, keiner bereit, dem anderen Platz zu machen. Ablichtung sanfter Kamele, kniend in der Nähe eines Kettenhunds. Ablichtung von Zuckerahornbäumen, zeitweilig verschleiert von Schneefall. Morgen früh, sofern die Lage sich nicht wesentlich verändert, werde ich mich persönlich an die Spitze des Wohnwagens setzen und bringe ihn über den Berg. Ich dachte, ich sähe einen Regenwurm, der in der Erde wühlt. Dann sah ich, es war ein Sadist, der die Knute schürt. Thanks.
Wow, you even did that rhyme at the end. Wonderful. Back to my life, and this will be read by Eric Falci, a colleague of Lyn from UC Berkeley, the English department. I would be remiss if the department were not represented at this reading. The German translation will be read by Sonja von Brocke, who I think is tuning in today from Vienna, Austria.
Reason looks for two, then arranges it from there. Where I woke and was awake, in the room fitting the wall withdrawn, I had my desk and thus my corner. While waiting, waltz. The soles of our boots wear thin, but the soles of our feet grow thick. The difference between he presented his argument and they had an argument. I still respond to the academic year, the sound of the school bell, the hot Wednesday morning after Labor Day. Must the physiologist stand apart from the philosopher? We are not forgetting the patience of the mad, their love of detail. The sudden, brief, early morning breeze, the first indication of a day's palpability, stays high in the trees. While flashing silver and green, the leaves flutter. A bird sweeps from one branch to another. The indistinct shadows lift off the crumpled weeds. Smoke rises from the gravel quarry. All this is metonymy. The argument is the plot, proved by the book, going forward and coming back later. Even posterity, alas, will know seers. As for we who love to be astonished, there are fences keeping cyclones, might be covered on the ground by no distance. She spread her fingers as she spoke, talking of artifice, which extends beauty beyond nature. Perhaps it is only a coincidence. For, as Nietzsche put it, if a man has character, he will have the same experience over and over again. In the morning at 8, I sensed the first threat of monotony. Give a penny with a knife. Candor is the high pitch of scrutiny. I was tired of ideas, or rather the activity of ideas. A kind of exercise had first invigorated me and then made me sleepy, so that I felt just as one does after a long, early morning walk, returning, unable to decide whether to drink more coffee or go back to sleep. The uncommon run of keeping oneself to oneself. The piggyback plant is okay. Tell anyone who telephones that I'm not home. I liked doing that, had made rooms for dolls on trucks that way, looking in on them through windows. It was a pretense of keeping our distance from anything that appeared pretentious. A sorry mess, but well framed. As if a contorted checkerboard formed the portrait of a handsome woman in a hat of several ochres and umbers. The dog circles more than a moth before resting. Let the traffic pass. They were on vacation and therefore bored. Someone wanted to go away from everywhere forever but jumped into the bay. We were warned such accidents happen while mothers talk on phones. A doodled, gnarled tree. Milk belongs to the mythology of cats, but it makes them sick. Ours was a stray with ringworm. One night each year on Boston's Beacon Hill, the curtains remained undrawn and the public was invited to peek in. I didn't wear my dark glasses because I didn't want a raccoon tan. Yet this needs shading in. It seemed that I didn't, after all, want a birthday empty of sentimentality. It's on the compulsive buyer's rack up front. The real adversary of my determination was determinism, regulating and limiting the range and degree of difference between things of one day and things of the next. I got it from Darwin, Freud, and Marx. Not fragments, but metonymy, duration. Language makes tracks.
Sonja?
Der Verstand schaut für zwei, arrangiert es dann von dort. Wo ich erwachte und wach war, im an die Wand grenzenden Zimmer, zurückgezogen, hatte ich meinen Schreibtisch und somit meine Ecke. Schlendere, während du wartest. Die Sohlen unserer Stiefel werden dünner, doch die Sohlen unserer Füße werden dicker. Der Unterschied zwischen er setzte seine Argumente auseinander und sie hatten eine Auseinandersetzung. Ich spreche noch immer auf das Schuljahr an, den Klang der Pausenglocke, den heißen Mittwochmorgen, der auf Labor Day folgt. Muss der Physiologe abseits vom Philosophen stehen? Wir vergessen die Geduld der Verrückten, ihre Detailliebe nicht. Die plötzliche, flüchtige Brise frühmorgens, erstes Anzeichen der Fassbarkeit eines Tags, bleibt hoch oben in den Bäumen, während silbern und grün die Blätter funkelnd flattern, ein Vogel von einem Zweig zum anderen saust, die verschwommenen Schatten vom knittrigen Unkraut sich abheben, Rauch aus der Kiesgrube aufsteigt. All das ist Metonymie. Die Auseinandersetzung ist die Handlung, durch das Buch bewährt. Vorwärts gehen und später zurückkehren. Selbst die Nachwelt wird Sears leider kennen. Was uns betrifft, die das Staunen lieben, gibt es Zäune, die Zyklone einhegen. Könnte abgedeckt sein auf dem Boden durch keine Distanz. Sie spreizte ihre Finger, während sie sprach und redete von Künstlichkeit, die Schönheit über Natur hinaus ausdehnt. Es ist vielleicht nur ein Zufall. Denn, wie Nietzsche meinte, hat man Charakter, so hat man auch sein typisches Erlebnis, das immer wieder kommt. Morgens um 8 spüre ich die erste bedrohliche Monotonie. Mit einem Messer verschenke eine Münze. Aufrichtigkeit ist der hohe Ton genauer Prüfung. Ich war der Ideen überdrüssig. Oder vielmehr hatte mich die Aktivität von Ideen, eine Art Training, zuerst belebt und schließlich ermüdet, sodass ich mich fühlte wie nach einem langen Frühmorgenspaziergang, unfähig zu entscheiden, ob ich nach der Rückkehr mehr Kaffee trinken oder mich noch einmal schlafen legen sollte. Der unübliche Verlauf, sich selbst für sich zu behalten. Die Henne immergrün mit Küken ist okay. Sag allen, die anrufen, ich bin nicht zu Hause. Ich tat das gerne, hatte so Zimmer für Puppen auf Karren gebaut, schaute durch Fenster zu ihnen hinein. Es war ein Vorwand, um Abstand von allem zu nehmen, das prahlerisch erschien. Ein jämmerliches Chaos. aber gut gerahmt. Als ergäbe ein verbogenes Schachbrett das Porträt einer stattlichen Frau mit Hut aus verschiedenen Ocker- und Umbratönen. Bevor sich der Hund hinlegt, zieht er mehr Kreise als eine Motte. Lass den Verkehr vorüberziehen. Sie waren im Urlaub, also gelangweilt. Jemand wollte für immer von überall weggehen, sprang aber in den Lorbeer. Man warnte uns, dass solche Unfälle geschahen, während Mütter telefonierten. Ein hingekritzelter, knorriger Baum. Milch gehört der Mythologie von Katzen an, macht sie aber krank. Wir hatten einen Streuner mit Ringelflechte. Im Bostoner Beacon Hill wurden die Gardinen für eine Nacht im Jahr nicht zugezogen und die Öffentlichkeit war dazu eingeladen, hineinzulinsen. Ich trug meine dunkle Brille nicht, weil ich keine Waschbärbräune wollte. Schattiert werden muss es trotzdem. Am Ende schien es doch so, dass ich keinen Geburtstag ohne Sentimentalität wollte. Es liegt vorne im Regal für Kaufsüchtige. Der wahre Widersacher meiner Determiniertheit war der Determinismus, der die Spannbreite und den Unterschiedsgrad zwischen den Dingen eines Tages und Dingen des Nächsten regulierte und limitierte. Ich habe das von Darwin, Freud und Marx. Keine Fragmente, sondern Metonymie, Dauer. Sprache legt Spuren. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Sonja. Vielen Dank, Norbert. So many Hejinians. I think we have Panos back. Panos Bosnakis. Panos, would you read your Greek translation of Reader? We heard the original from Ed Roberson before. Do we though? Panos, do we have you? Just saw you. Oh, apparently internet connection in Athens is not as reliable. I mean, where is it? In that case, we'll piggyback to the birthday motifs. And I think we're allowed to celebrate this reading as a birthday for Lyn, who, as her narrator says, it seemed that I didn't, after all, want a birthday empty of sentimentality. Well, on to more birthday boys and birthday girls. Violet Spurlock, who just turned 30 last night, will now read a chapter from Ochota, and I will read my Russian translation. I know that this is one of those bits from Ochota that Violet is particularly partial to. It's the final one. But this is also one that Lyn herself singled out when we were doing a reading in Russian, also a bilingual event where Lyn read her work in English and me and maybe someone else did the Russian. She selected this chapter for the reading from Ochota, so I feel justified in presenting this to you. Violet, over to you.
Chapter 270, Redemption. After something, into somewhere, they await each other. Each is how bewildered, and not only to the setting. Instigated, half out of spiral, split. Why halt? We will not lead what we mean, each time in obverse as perceived. Spring doesn't follow winter, but it shadows it reversed. Now, morning, morning, nothing less. It's real to the season, the most passing, just being there. And we will continue to acquire existence. And to confuse it, we are both.
Thank you, Violet. Violet is my other gift, my other gift from Lyn. So many are. So is Ed Roberson. I only went to his reading in San Francisco when he was here because Lyn told me to. But this is the end of Ochota, the hunt. I also wanted to say that one of the occasions, one of the reasons for this reading is to celebrate each of you, the readers, friends, collaborators, translators, co-authors, as well as all the many other people who worked on Lyn's work. Designers, people who did layout, people who brought her books to different independent bookshops. Yeah, but also friends. Like I said, one such important friend was Arkady Dragomoshenko, the Russian, Ukrainian, Soviet poet. Another friend was Arkady's wife, Zina, who passed away only a couple of weeks ago. And Zina was a major inspiration behind Ochota. In fact, Zina suggested this title. Ochota means the hunt in Russian. Can also have different other translations, such as I want to, мне охота. So this is also, I think, in memory of Zina. It's the one who, as the Ochota says at a different place, crossed the currents. Глава 270. Искупление. После кое-какого «что» в кое-какое «куда» они ожидают друг друга. Как каждый из них оглушен к окружающему ландшафту, раззадорен, полуслетел с колеи, расклепан. С чего бы стопор? Мы не выведем то, что имеем в виду. Каждый раз лицевой стороной, как казалось, не следует весна за зимой, а следит за ней наизнанку. Сейчас. Утро. Утро. Именно так. Настоящее по нынешней поре, самой приходящей. Протяни руку. Тут она. И мы и дальше будем обретать существование, избивать его с толку. Нас оба. Now back to my life. And the question is whether Jen Scappettone has joined us. Yes, I see Jen.
I have indeed.
Wonderful. So we can now hear from Jen, who will read another chapter from my life, and then Nicholas Nilsson will read his Swedish translation.
Okay, and in the spirit of improvisation, I think that Lyn would enjoy the fact that I am in Milwaukee at a cafe, having handed my cat off to her grandparents for the summer. And I am here with our mutual friend, Roberto Harrison. And so I'm going to read the first page of this section, and then I'm going to hand it off to him.
Delightful. Thank you.
Yeah, because you can hear it in the background. The plow makes trough enough. Last night in my dreams, I swam to the bottom of a lake, pushed off in the mud, and rising rapidly to the surface, shot 8 or 10 feet out of the water into the air. I couldn't join the demonstration because I was pregnant, and so I had revolutionary experience without taking revolutionary action. History hugs the world. The muses are little female fellows. To some extent, each sentence has to be the whole story. It is hard to turn away from moving water, where the tiny pebbles are left along the shore. Being colorblind, he could not tell if they were brown or green. Romance says, "Come away with me," but neglects to say whence, or is it whither? Writer solstice. Let's listen for the last of the autumn frogs. A paragraph measured in minutes, doing the sort of thing I can't do. What you can't discover is the limit of possibility, which must always remain to be discovered. Religion is a vague lowing. At the time, the perpetual Latin of love kept things hidden. When you say they are both reading the same book, do you mean the same writing but in different copies? Or do you mean in turns at the same copy? That same moon is shining over my love tonight. How can there be a fire in this cold? On those first spring mornings, on the front steps in the sunlight shining on the red brick apartment building, we see where we sat rocking the babies in their buggies while we kept the toddlers out of the street. On the grimy laundry porch, dove-like, really, a pretty pigeon laid an egg. Then when the egg eventually hatched, the repulsive bird ate the chick. Just get on a plane to see other things somewhere.
Roberto, you're muted. Roberto? Okay.
Oh, we don't have the sound. I'm sorry. Jen, Roberto, you actually muted. Hmm.
Ivan, as the host, I believe you can unmute him.
Can I? Let me see. Let me see. This is funny.
Roberto was muted.
Were we muted?
Yes.
You were muted. No, Jen, I heard you, but then I didn't hear Roberto. Do you want to do that again?
Should we redo it?
Yeah, do.
Okay, you were muted, Roberto.
Oh my God.
Shoot, I'm sorry.
The water ouzel flies either over or underwater. No puppy or dog will ever be capable of this, and surely no parrot. A neighbor rolled the terriers in a stroller and wiped their little bottoms with a tissue when they shat. Once an enervating romance as scorn was, but sometimes I think because of, not despite, all the activity, I felt as serene as when I had studied the irregular and slightly undependable patterns of the kitchen tiles as a child, to which I had so happily resigned myself, and trying to find the place at which the pattern repeats. Test the heat with a quick finger. Recall the wind of which I speak. One could elaborate. Greenery, insects, the rain as well. After C, I before, E, except, obligato. Things that don't seem real won't happen. The bareback rider in her boots leaping from muddy horse to muddy horse. Such displacement to alter illusions, which is all to the good. A further folk among the rocks. The gutters were open in the street, in the hills where we had walked despite the rain, for a view of the ships shut in the sea. Hands, pockets, maple leaves wet enough to thicken underfoot, leave as may be, return as I should, but with the beggar baby, the arrogant, innocent young. They had failed to come up with a leader. The word version is a comparative noun, which must imply its plural form, the one that includes many. Should a good mother have more kids? The inconsolable jealousy which tells her of her love declares it. For you, Forsythia,
Are you sure you don't?
the grass is my glass.
Yay, we heard that. Thank you.
Thanks,
I'm so
everyone. Sorry.
I'm so glad you made it, both of you. This is a wonderful surprise. Okay, going back to different things on order on menu, we have another section from As Old as the Bride of What Thinking. And this time we're going to hear the English from Carla Harryman, and then there'll be a Russian translation by Vladimir Feshenko.
I have a
Ivan,
question.
and what about the Swedish translation?
What about the translation?
Yeah,
Oh my
we
God.
haven't heard.
See, you are better MCs than I am. I'm completely lost in the sky of correspondences. Nicholas, no offense intended. Please read the Swedish translation if you don't mind.
That's fine. Plog gör fåror nog. I natt i mina drömmar simrade jag till botten av en sjö, sköt ifrån i dyn och flög efter en snabb stigning mot ytan, 3 eller 4 meter upp i luften. Jag kunde inte gå i demonstrationen eftersom jag var gravid och gjorde därför revolutionära erfarenheter utan att handla revolutionärt. Historien kramar världen. Musorna är små kvinnokollegor. I någon mån måste varje mening vara hela berättelsen. Det är svårt att vända sig bort från strömmande vatten när småstenarna lir kvar på stranden. Eftersom han var färgblind såg han inte om de var bruna eller gröna. Romansen säger, följ med mig, men säger inte vartåt, eller är det varthän? Skrivarsolståndet. Låt oss lyssna efter den sista av höstens grodor. Ett stycke räknat i minuter som gör saker jag inte kan göra. Det man inte kan upptäcka är möjligheternas gräns som alltid måste förbli oupptäckt. Religion är ett svagt råmande. Vid den tiden höll saker dolda av kärlekens eviga latin. När du säger, de läser båda samma bok, menar du samma text i olika exemplar eller menar du turas om med samma exemplar? Samma måne lyser över min kärlek i natt. Hur kan en eld brinna i den här kylan? De där första vårmorgnarna på trappan, i solen som sken över det röda tegelhuset, ser vi där vi satt och vaggade de små i vagnarna medan vi höll ungarna borta från gatan. På den smutsiga tvättverandan lade en vacker duva, på ett duvaktigt sätt faktiskt, ett ägg. Och när ägget sedan kläcktes åt den motbjudande fågeln upp ungen. Gå bara ombord på ett plan för att se andra saker någonstans. Strömstaren flyger antingen över eller under vatten. Ingen valp eller hund kommer någonsin att kunna göra det. Och definitivt ingen papegoja. En granne drog sina terriers i en vagn och torkade deras små rumpor med näsduk när de sket. En gång en enerverande romans försmådd. Men ibland, på grund av, tror jag, inte trots all aktivitet, kände jag mig lika rofylld som när som barn studerade kökskaklets oregelbundna och opålitliga mönster. Vilket jag gärna hängav mig åt för att hitta det stället där mönstret upprepas. Kolla värmen med ett snabbt finger. Minns det när om vilket jag talar. Man kunde utveckla. Grönska, insekter, även regnet. Efter se, i före, är utan. Obligat. Saker som inte verkar vara på riktigt händer inte. Hon som red barbacka i sina stövlar hoppade från lerig häst till lerig häst. Sådana förskjutningar förändrar illusioner, vilket är för allas bästa. Ett annat folk bland stenarna. Avloppen var öppna på gatan, på kullarna där vi trots regnet hade gått för att se fartygen, stängda i havet. Händer, fickor, lönnlöv blöta nog att fastna under fötter. Åker som det går, återvänder som jag bör, men med tiggarbarnet. De arroganta, oskyldiga unga. De hade inte lyckats hitta en ledare. Ordet version är ett komparativt substantiv som måste implicera en pluralform. Den som inkluderar många. Bör en bra mor skaffa fler barn? Den otröstliga svartsjukan som berättar för henne om hennes kärlek uttrycker den. Till dig försyter jag, gräs i mitt glas.
Thank you, Nicholas. And actually, before we get to return to Asodas the Bride of Thinking, it seems like Panos Bosnakis is back with us. Panos, would you like to read your Greek translation of the first poem from Rido, if the connection allows? You need to unmute. But you're not unmuted yet. Please unmute. Yeah.
Okay, I would like to thank everyone here and joining this meeting. I'm going to read the Greek translation of the first poem of Redo. Η συμφωνία αντιστρέφει το σονέτο, πλημμυρίζοντάς το με σύμφωνα. Πλήθος σπουργίτια. Σαν άνεμος σκορπά την πρόχειρη φωλιά, ενώ καταφθάνει ένα πουλί με ένα φωνήεν στο ράμφος. Δεν μπορούμε να σκεφτούμε δύο πράγματα μαζί, εκτός αν σκεφτούμε δύο φορές. Η κοπηλάτισσα προσποιείται ότι κοπηλατεί. Η αυτοβιογραφία της είναι 90% ερεθιστική. Με την ηθική το μόνο που κατορθώνουμε είναι να φωνάζουμε το όνομα κάποιου που γνωρίζουμε. Στο διανοητικό νερό, τα κροταλίζοντα ρούχα και τα μάλινα βράχια σφυρίζουν στον άνεμο. Όταν ήμουν παιδί, αθώο, με ειλικρίνεια, ένιωθα αβάσταχτο να έχω φίλους. Όταν με εμπόδιζαν με συμπάθεια, είχα. Μερικοί ήταν, πρώτον, επιθετικοί και αγαπημένοι, δεύτερον, συνεπέστατα αντιφατικοί και τρίτον, συνηθισμένοι και άτεχνοι, σαν τις αγέλες. Με τη φροηδική αίσθηση του χιούμορ αισθανόμασταν αντιπάθεια για τους επιθετικούς μας χαιρετισμούς. Όμως η ανακάλυψη της φωτιάς οδήγησε και στην ανακάλυψη του νερού. Σύννεφα συσσωρεύονται στη γυαλιστερή επιφάνεια του πυλού. Καλοθρεμμένα πουλιά μαζεύονται στο γυαλιστερό ουρανό. Το παχύ φεγγάρι προβάλλει κοντά μας και φεύγει. Οι αναρχίες κοιμούνται στην πολυτέλεια του χρόνου σαν τεχνικές λεπτομέρειες. Ανώνυμο πλήθος, αναρωτιέμαι τίνος, με υπενθυμίζει ένα τυχείο χωρίς τσιμέντο. Αύριο η ίδια απαράλλαχτη μέρα στη ζωή μου. Όμως ο ύπνος μας δίνει την ευχαρίστηση της γενναιόδωρης ευχαρίστησης, αν είμαστε ξυπνητοί. Okay.
Thank you, Panos. I'm glad you were able to read. Carla Harryman and Vladimir Fishenko are thought as the bride to what thinking? Carla, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
A thought is the bride of what thinking? Bravery is what they boast of. The writer works from the inside out, but never gets out, partially because he can't, and partially because, in any case, he doesn't want to. It is only the mind with its heart that recognizes immaterial things. The senses are incapable of doing so. The long sweep is to tell you no one's been there for a while. Lordy, what more can you say than that? He made up every story he told, and you still believed them, and would today, with us all. His cat kept rolling in the dust like a dog or hen or an empty wine bottle. Nothing shiny about it. He'd been up in the dark, he told us once, walking. There was this fat woman staying there, and she had taken the medicine for her asthma, which was bad, especially in the spring. She'd been there a while, and he loved her a bit, and was good to her 2 little children. She thought to go sit in the garden to get her breath, and there she sat and died. He came back from his walk, and there she was, in the moonlight, among the little lettuces. He was upset, of course, but with the help of a neighbor, they got her into his car, and he drove her to the hospital. They arrested him there for transporting a dead body and took the children away and put them in a home. His things sat there for a long time. Hawk this little songster, the kitchen, the gas station, the shoes and socks, the toothpaste, the wooden chairs, the noodles, the catsup and coffee, the aspirin, the water, the shit, the newspaper, the pencil, the coughing, the toenails, the interesting minutes. Often, and particularly in the hot weather, horses will stand side by side but facing in opposite directions. The one, as he switches his tail, drives the flies from the face and neck of the other, and no doubt stirs the breeze. Occasionally, horses which are particularly fond of each other, and horses do develop very marked friendships, will rest their head on each other's rump. He kept his horse, a young black gelding, in a field below his house with a flock of some 30 or so sheep. I've often seen the horse, his head hanging down over the rump of one of the sheep, while the sheep grazes or stares out over the field. The poet plays with the order, makes order of disorder, and disorder of order, intent upon confusing all the issues. He is unwilling to distinguish reality from veracity and veracity from tale, and sees what he thinks to see. His is a positive, though a pessimistic view of life. Much is amusing, as much is disgusting, but he says he's not afraid.
Мысль невеста, невесть какого мышления. Храбрость – вот чем они гордятся. Писатель работает изнутри, но никогда не оказывается снаружи. Отчасти потому, что не может, отчасти потому, что и не хочет. Только разум со своим сердцем способен распознать нематериальное, чувства не способны на это. Плавный переход, чтобы сказать тебе, что там давненько никого не было. Боженьки, что еще к этому прибавить? Каждую свою историю он сочинял сам, и все же ему верилось, и сейчас верилось бы с нами всеми. Его кошка каталась в пыли, как собака, как курица, как пустая бутылка вина. Ничего такого блестящего. Как-то он проснулся в ночи, рассказал он нам, пошел прогуляться, там ночевала эта толстушка, приняв накануне свое лекарство от астмы, чего не стоило делать, особенно весной. Она провела там уже какое-то время, и он немного любил ее, хорошо ладил с двумя ее детьми. Она решила сходить в сад, посидеть, перевести дыхание, уселась и умерла. Он вернулся с прогулки, она сидела в лунном свете среди зеленых травок. Он, понятно, расстроился, но при помощи соседа перетащил ее в машину и отвез в больницу. Там его арестовали за перевозку мертвого тела, забрали детей от него и отправили в детский дом. Вещи его еще долго сидели там. Выплюнь, певичка, и кухня, и автозаправка, и обувь с носками, и паста зубная, и деревянные стулья, и лапша, и кетчуп с кофе, и аспирин, и вода, и дерьмо, и газета, и карандаш, и кашель, и ногти на пяльцах ног, и интересные минуты. Часто, особенно когда жарко, кони будут стоять бок о бок, но смотреть в разные стороны. Один, махая хвостом, отгоняет мух от лица, от шеи другого, конечно, обдавая ветерком. Иногда кони, испытывающие симпатию друг к другу, а у них бывают ярко выраженные отношения, кладут голову на круп друг друга. Он держал своего коня, молоденького черного мерина, на выгоне около дома, вместе со стадом 3 десятков овец. Я часто видела, как конь этот свешивал голову над шеей одной из овец, пасущихся рядом и всматривающихся в поле. Поэт играет с порядком, творит порядок из хаоса, хаос из порядка, оставаясь решительным посреди любого беспорядка. Ему не нужно отличать реальность от достоверности, достоверность от сказки, он видит то, что думает видеть. У него позитивный, хоть и пессимистичный взгляд на жизнь. Многое его забавляет, а многое отвращает. Но он говорит, что нечего бояться.
Thank you, Volodya. Thank you, Carla. Something really priceless about hearing those lines in your voice. Priceless about hearing the catsup and the coffee, the aspirin, the water, the shit, the newspaper, the pencil, the interesting minutes. And Volodya is not only a Russian translator of Lyn, but I'd be remiss not to say a really influential figure in bringing the work of language poets to Russian readers, editor of many a publication, including, among other things, the bilingual edition of selected works by Lyn Hejinian that I mentioned before, Masters of Motion, as well as a giant, a mammoth of an anthology from Black Mountain to language writing, which features many of the poets that are present on this Zoom today. Next up, back to my life, and we'll hear from two very special people. The English will be read by Ron Silliman, and the Russian translation by Ruslan Mironov, who has translated a lot of Lyn into Russian, will be read by one of the two publishers of this book. One of the two. By the publisher of My Life in Russian, Katya Morozova, Nossorog Press. I'm particularly happy about this combination because we three, Ron, Katya, and I, meet or cross paths, so to say, virtually because of a different project, namely the publication of my translation of Ron Silliman's You, which here you can see on sale in Buenos Aires in Argentina. The blue one on the left is Ron's You, and the pink one on the right is Lyn's My Life, both out from Nossorog. Ron, over to you.
Okay. Lyn and I first appeared on opposite pages of a magazine out of the University of Wisconsin called Arts and Society in 1969, and she was publishing in those days as C.H. Hejinian because, as she put it, when she gave her full first name, editors were coming on to her. and she found that obnoxious. I have to say, listening to all these wonderful languages and translations, that Lyn is unmistakably Lyn in every single one. And some of it, I think, has to do with the rhythm, the difference between the sentences that are just observations, and then there are some characteristic longer sentences in Lyn's work. So the idea that we're reading from different texts and the text might not line up word for word does not bother me at all, because what I hear is the Lynness in all of it. So the settling in that we're describing is a preliminary to being blown up. And I'm reading from the 1987 edition from My Life from Sun and Moon Press, just because among the 4 editions I have, I like the typeface the best. Choi is built into skyscrapers since it is natural to trees. It is completely straightforward. On occasion, I've transferred my restlessness, the sense of necessity, to the vehicle itself. And if I feel like a book, a person on paper, I will continue. What is the gender on paper? A fatigue in the cold, a fear of finishing. And doesn't it make a difference to me reading this book now to know that you're going to read the same book afterwards in the same copy, these self-same words? And would that difference be different if you were reading your own copy of the book at the same time that I was reading mine? It seemed natural to her to confuse the romantic with the motherly. Still, I was learning to talk about old cars in cherry condition. Sounds like a tough guy being lively in a small world. Go out and see what there is. Lifting the plywood, we saw mouse paths in the dirt. One wants a bike that if you lay it down, you can pick it up. And we shined its chunky chrome. I realized that I had finally reached an age from which I could love my parents entirely generously. We were like plump birds again along the shore, clumsy among the sandpipers. It was as if an adventure itself had overtaken the idea of adventure and swamped it. And I was overwhelmed by a sense of deep patience, of serenity, not because I felt detached or distant from my disrupted and peculiar life. On the contrary, I was absolutely at one with it. And it is this that I realized years later in Russia. Adventure amazes me with peace. When the fog casts a shadow, one puts on a coat, unstitch the tent, and sail away. After crossing the boundary which distinguishes the work from the rest of the universe, the reader is expected to recross the boundary with something in mind. About things is not so much a comment counting. We're not forgetting the patience of the mad, their love of detail. For hours at a time, as the car speeds along, I relax, equating the dumb with the silent, equating silence with insignificance. I came to depend on my children socially, was never at a loss with them. A busy street is an entertainment. A nest is the house of a bird. We know better now than to lean on sugar. As for we who love to be astonished, the old-fashioned branching ice cream cones could hold twin pairs of scoops, or 4. Jazz is becoming a dirty word in the inner circles of improvisation. Pronouns skirt the subject. The so-called brilliant thinker is found notable by virtue of his or her intellectual activity. But what if this activity is irrational? He showed the left profile, the good one. In the line between red cords at the bank stood a tremulous old woman in an orange hat, her cane at a jaunty angle. She has spent all of her free time. On the bus, I heard one woman say to another, "Every day I say my prayer. When I get too old to wait on myself, I say, then Lord dismiss me." The neighborhood dogs strike up their choral warbling and the fire engines respond. One wall makes a row. An acquaintance came to visit, but I was entirely distracted by the facts, namely that time is going by. I've heard that it once was a napron. It is hard to turn away from moving water, and my memory of him is a poor likeness, like jealousy, which cannot get what love has secured. The fear of losing ideas objectifies knowledge. The remainder may be a reminder, the curve its cup. That seat is taken as soon as you sit. A dream of furniture in motion at night past doll games.
Hello, everybody. Описываемое нами обустройство – прелюдия к взрыву. Покачивание встроено в небоскребы, поскольку это естественно для деревьев, что в корне прямолинейно. Временами свое неизбежное ощущение беспокойства я передавала непосредственно транспортному средству. И если я почувствую себя подобно книге вымыслом, то я продолжу. Каков пол вымысла? Холодная отрешенность, страх окончания. Для меня не имеет значения, когда читаю эту книгу сейчас, что ты захочешь потом прочесть ту же самую книгу, в той же копии, в тех же словах. И в чем будет разница, если ты прочитаешь свой экземпляр одновременно со мной? Для нее было естественным смешивать романтичное с материнским. И все-таки я предпринимала попытки порассуждать о девственном состоянии подержанных автомобилей. С выразительностью крутого парня из того мира, который тесен. Выйди и погляди, как оно есть. Приподняв лист фанеры, мы наблюдали мышиные тропы в земле. Кому же не хочется иметь велосипед, который, повалив на землю, приятно оседлать по новой? Толстый слой хрома мы натирали до блеска. Я поняла, что достигла теперь того возраста, чтобы любить родителей исключительно великодушно. Мы снова были подобны раскормленным птицам на побережье, среди куликов неуклюжим. Казалось, само приключение настигло идею приключений и поглотило ее. Меня переполнило чувство безмятежности и безграничного терпения, но не потому, что я почувствовала себя как-то обособленно от своей эксцентричной и беспорядочной жизни. Напротив, я всецело в ней задержалась. Именно это я поняла несколько лет спустя в России. Приключение потрясает меня спокойствием. Когда туман отбрасывает тень, надевают пальто. Распороть палатку и отчалить. После пересечения границы, отделяющей работу от остальной части Вселенной, читатель, думается, пересечет границу повторно, что-то держа в уме. О вещах. Это не только учет комментариев. Чтим терпение безумцев, их влюбленность в детали. За то время, пока мчится машина, я расслабляюсь, отождествляя немого с молчащим, молчание с бессодержательностью. Я стала зависима от своих детей в плане общения, что меня нисколько не затруднило. Оживленная улица – зрелище. Гнездо, птичий дом. Мы теперь не настолько глупы, чтобы нагибаться за сахаром. Что касается нас, любящих удивляться, старомодный конус вафельного рожка вмещает 2 двойных шарика мороженого, а значит целых 4. Джаз становится ругательством в узких кругах импровизаторов. Местоимение стороной обходит предмет. Так называемый блестящий мыслитель получает известность на основании своей интеллектуальной деятельности. Но что, если эта деятельность иррациональна? Она предъявила свой левый, правильный профиль. В банке меж красных ленточных ограждений стояла дряхлая старуха в оранжевой шляпе с беспечно поднятой тростью. Она истратила все свое свободное время. В автобусе я услышала, как одна женщина говорила другой: «Я ежедневно произношу свою молитву. Когда я стану слишком старой, чтобы ухаживать за собой, говорю я, Господь отпустит меня». Соседские собаки хором начинают петь, пожарные машины вторят. Одна стена образует ряд. Приятельница пришла ко мне в гости, но я была слишком расстроена фактами, а именно тем, что время уходит. Мне говорили, что когда-то это был фартук. Нелегко оторваться от движущейся воды, и моя память о нем – только видимость, наподобие ревности, не способной добиться того, что защищает любовь. Страх утраты идей воплощает знания. Остальное напомнит изгиб его чашки. Ты займешь это место, как только на нем разместишься. По ночам сны о мебели на колесах, игры минувших кукол. Спасибо. Thank you.
Спасибо, Katya. Thank you, Ron. It does feel that Lyn did as she said. What was it? If I feel like a book, a person on paper, I will continue. She did continue in so many ways. One final way in which she will continue for us today is the continuation of my life in the 90s, which we will hear in a Spanish translation from the Argentine translator Patricio Greenberg, and the original will be read by Tony Lopez from England, Plymouth, if I'm right. Right, Tony?
From Exmouth, nearby.
Over to you.
Okay. We need language to aid the senses. We have words to guard continents of fruits and organs. Knowledge is an incitement I turned over. I was in search of a better position, strangers' times. From 10 to 1, dance one day and draw another. From 1 to 2, draw on the day you dance and write a letter the day after. My senses too seem to exist. I hear the sounds of a blue jay squawking between the leaves, and suddenly again feel the many links between that and the minuscule elements of smell from the grey rain beginning to fall. But the well-known is not necessarily known at all. The moment of panorama, the momentum of preparation. Anticipation is not autonomous. In the dream, I was accosted by a woman asking for a mouse with which to distract a great bear that was poised at her feet, growling ferociously, and she warned me not to run for it. She said there'd be no point. Bears can travel at 40 miles an hour. Well, says someone, we have still the vitality of ourselves in boots from our days on a frontier, which we made it our business to contemplate. Rising from behind in the morning, muttering, a phrase plays upon the conquering surface of things. She sang, I drove my daddy's Cadillac from Dallas to the sea, but the prairie holds the cowboy I'll always want to be. There is no best without its corresponding thing. The rest is discontinuous. The poetry is connection. We are players in a theatre of struggling wills. Then write a letter every day, though you'll have no guarantee that the communicability of your femininity or the fact that the substance and mode of your experience is communicability will be admired. It's not you yourself, but your life that deserves attention. Destiny must play a part in any good Western, suffusing the landscape with inevitability, itself an expanded frontier, and presenting the moral characters with unavoidable and often unwelcome choices. In the dusty town at the Plum Cute beauty shop, they were offering shampoos and other passive exercises. The body goes and the head seeks matter. This doesn't lack logic. It is a trick of love. The biggest tree is over there, the man said and pointed, reminding me of the contingency of my expectations. Not form and content, but will and content. Just by being under the sky, a person knows it exists and has no need to explain it. But at this, I was interrupted by the smell of smoke, then rising flames, the vastness of which, as well as my inability, after having been told to pack the car to prepare for evacuation, to find anything that seemed worth taking, feeling instead abstracted, severed from both the material and the symbolic orders, subsequently, and for many months afterwards, left me feeling insignificant, insubstantial, and abandoned. I gazed at the cadaver and held its heart, removing from a once melodious cavity, as dislocated as an angel seated on a cloud without ever having had to overcome the forces of gravity. They say that Goethe refused to let his life become an unstructured and unintended sequence of events, but rather each major event in it, foreseen or not, was to be pondered and given its place in a newly interrupted whole. Then, compelled to summon strength to wake up, to get out of bed, and to accept captivity. It was late on Grand Avenue, after 1 a.m., the stoplights set only to blink yellow, the 4-lane street empty, and I was driving inattentively until suddenly I was aware that from somewhere, some side street, a cop car had appeared and a guy was flashing his lights at me, flooding me with despair. But I am always shifting scale now. Out of the blue rags comes a raging wind rough enough to make a rigid rain. Horses laboring to gallop in the sand, a banjo player in a restaurant moving from table to table. In such autobiographical writings, we trace the effects of mental operations to their source. There is no difference of truth that doesn't make a difference of fact somewhere. The skin moves attention from thing to thing. Emerald Ellie, as she was called to distinguish her from Ellie Allen, the other Ellie in their club, was probably killed by her boyfriend, Freddie J. or J. Claybridge, aka Garbage, and certainly by repeated hammer blows to the top of her head. The writer realizes her duty to keep the data of what's immediately moving. Facts not only are, but they are known. And from the time I was old enough to know the facts, remember sounds, require sense. I thought such work had as much similarity to reality as one could provide. Toasting bread, waving the hose, lifting the cap from a chair. I gave myself credit for joie de vivre, and we've known that changing endlessness, since endlessness is right in front of us. Accuracy is not the voice of nature. The house was clean for its own sake, except for a scrap of paper that I'd missed, no bigger than a speck on the floor. And I heaved myself out of the chair and picked up the scrap, which, if I'd noticed it a few hours later, after the cleanliness had settled, I'd have left. I am not saying that personal generosity will solve everything. It cannot even solve today, not with an act, not with anonymity. Perhaps it's the consummation of all we're going to sadden. The hill is gated, the light has bobbed and dropped, the dog howls, and a rat has torn the door off the oven. The West is confined to infinity. The philosophical, i.e. resigned cattle, turn their heads to look at us as we hike by, and swarming from a small mound at the side of the road, there are ants. They are social, but do not pretend to come from any country. According to Tolstoy's yardstick, humans get their ideas from words, but horses get them from facts. I still, now and then, see Madame on the street, an elegant, though tiny, and now very old woman carrying a small bundle of groceries in a string bag, but I don't speak to her out of shyness and the near certainty that she wouldn't remember me, whom she had in her 5th grade French class almost 40 years ago, but also out of terror, since she taught her class with such ferocity, expressing, I suppose, passionate belief in the rightness, the superiority, the perfection of pied over foot and mont over hill, that she made my life miserable until one evening, as I was riding to my grandparents' house in the little township in the Oakland Hills called Piedmont, I felt suddenly triumphant pleasure that comes from linking one thing to another, the thrill of making sense. We live in a relative state with prepositional sensations. At the live porn theatre, I was to see that each woman paradoxically hid her mound by shaving it. On a chair at night, in old clothes at my desk, beside the window looking out during a storm at the wind pouring over the trees under the streetlight. The schizophrenic, gazing at something, watches it turn not only unfamiliar but unreal. But the artistic gaze and the resulting defamiliarization heightens a thing's palpability, sees it turn not only unfamiliar but real. There is altruism in poetry. Come morning, the wind in the sunlight is the color of spilling milk, but the hills are charred, houses lost, and the city stretches out, named for Bishop George Berkeley in honor of his line, westward the course of empire takes its way. The knowledge is embodied, and the body is trembling, terrified because it's unprepared. It forgot to get ready, it forgot to buy food, it forgot to dress. And so we believe it to be what we truly believe it to be. We must open it. In words, to have my moments twice I writhe. It finds itself, or more precisely, cannot find itself, and advances, staring at itself. The West is here. We can ground our uncertainties on nothing else.
Thank you, Tony. Patricio Greenberg, Argentina.
Necesitamos del lenguaje para ayudar a los sentidos. Tenemos palabras para proteger continentes de frutas y órganos. El conocimiento es una provocación que abandoné. Estaba buscando una mejor posición, tiempos de extraños más extraños. De 10 a 1, bailaba un día y dibujaba el otro. De 1 a 2, dibujaba el día que bailás y escribí una carta al día siguiente. Parece que mis sentidos también existen. Escucho los sonidos de una chara azul canturreando entre las hojas y de pronto, de nuevo, siento los muchos enlaces entre eso y los minúsculos elementos del olor de la lluvia gris que empieza a caer. Pero lo muy conocido no es necesariamente conocido, para nada. El momento del panorama, el impulso de la preparación, la anticipación no es autónoma. En el sueño me abandona una mujer que me pedía un ratón para distraer a un gran oso que gruñía ferozmente a mis pies y me advirtió que no escapara, dijo que no tendría sentido. Los osos pueden correr a 65 kilómetros por hora. Bueno, dice alguien, todavía tenemos la vitalidad propia de las botas de nuestros días en la frontera que tomamos el trabajo de contemplar. Levantándose desde atrás a la mañana, murmurando, se reproduce una frase sobre la superficie conquistadora de las cosas. Ella cantó: conduje el Cadillac de mi papi desde Dallas hasta el mar, pero la pradera tiene el cowboy que yo siempre quise ser. No existe lo mejor sin su cosa correspondiente. El resto es discontinuo, la poesía es conexión. Somos actores en un teatro de voluntades en conflicto. Entonces escribí una carta todos los días, aunque no tendrás ninguna garantía de que la comunicabilidad de tu femineidad, ni del hecho de que la sustancia y el modo de tu experiencia sean comunicabilidad, sea admirada. No sos vos, sino tu vida lo que merece atención. El destino siempre debe jugar un papel en todo buen western, cargando el paisaje de fatalidad en sí mismo una frontera expandida y presentando a los caracteres morales con decisiones inevitables y con frecuencia indeseables. En el polvoriento pueblo, en el salón de belleza Plum Cute, estaban ofreciendo lavados y otros ejercicios pasivos. El cuerpo se va y la cabeza busca materia. Esto no carece de lógica, es un truco del amor. El árbol más grande está por ahí, dijo el hombre, y señaló recordándome lo contingente de mis expectativas. No forma y contenido, sino voluntad y contenido. Solo por estar bajo el cielo una persona sabe que existe y no tiene necesidad de explicarlo. Pero en este punto fui interrumpida por el olor del humo, luego las llamas que se alzaban, la vastedad que, tanto como mi incapacidad para encontrar, después de que me dijeron que cargue el auto y me prepare para evacuar, algo que pareciese que valiera la pena llevar, sintiéndome, en vez, abstraída, separado tanto del orden material como del simbólico. Subsecuentemente y por muchos meses después, me dejó sintiéndome insignificante, insustancial y abandonada. Observé el cadáver y sostuve su corazón, quitado de una cavidad que alguna vez fue melodiosa, tan dislocado como un ángel sentado en una nube, sin jamás haber tenido que vencer la fuerza de gravedad. Dicen que Goethe se negaba a dejar que su vida se convirtiera en una secuencia de eventos desestructurada y sin intención, pero más bien, cada gran acontecimiento, previsto o no, debería ser ponderado y reubicado dentro de un todo con una nueva interpretación. Entonces, obligada a juntar fuerzas, despertarme, salir de la cama y aceptar el cautiverio, era tarde en Grand Avenue, después de la 1, los semáforos programados solo parpadeaban en amarillo, la calle de 4 carriles vacía y yo manejaba sin prestar atención hasta que de pronto advertí que, de alguna manera, en alguna calle lateral, un auto de policía había aparecido y el tipo hacía luces, llenándome de desesperación. Pero siempre estoy cambiando de escala. Ahora, en unos trapos azules sale un viento furioso, lo suficientemente intenso como para producir una lluvia rígida. Caballos esforzándose para galopar en la arena. Un músico toca el banjo de mesa en un restaurante. En tales escritos autobiográficos podemos rastrear los efectos de las operaciones mentales hasta su origen. No hay una diferencia en la verdad que no haga una diferencia de hecho en alguna parte. Emerald Ellie, como la llamaban para diferenciarla de Ellie Allen, la otra Ellie en su club, fue probablemente asesinada por su novio, Freddie J. o Jay Claridge, alias Basura, y seguramente por repetidos martillazos en la cabeza. La escritora realiza su tarea para tener los datos de lo que inmediatamente se mueve. Los hechos no solo son, sino que son conocidos, y desde el momento en que fui lo suficientemente grande como para conocer los hechos, recordar sonidos, requerir sentido, pensé que un trabajo así tenía tanta similitud con la realidad como lo que uno le pudiera dar, tostando el pan, enrollando la manguera, levantando al gato de la silla. Me felicité por mi joie de vivre. Y lo hemos sabido, ese cambio de lo interminable, ya que lo interminable está justo delante de nosotros. La precisión no es sólo de la voz de la naturaleza. La casa estaba limpia por su propio bien, salvo por un pedazo de papel que había quedado, no mayor a un punto, en el piso, y me levanté con esfuerzo de la silla y recogí el papelito que, de haberlo notado unas horas después de haber terminado la limpieza, hubiera dejado. No estoy diciendo que la generosidad personal lo resolverá todo. No puede ni siquiera resolver el día de hoy, ni con un acto, ni con el anonimato. Quizás sea la consumación de todo lo que vamos a entristecer. La colina está enrejada, la luz saltó y cayó, el perro aúlla y la rata ha arrancado la puerta del horno. El oeste está confinado a la infinidad. El ganado filosófico, es decir, resignado, gira la cabeza para mirarnos mientras pasamos y en un pequeño montículo al costado del camino hay un enjambre de hormigas. Son sociables, pero no fingen venir de ningún país. Según el Colstomer de Tolstoy, los humanos sacan sus ideas de las palabras, pero los caballos las sacan de los hechos. Todavía cada tanto veo a Madame en la calle, una mujer elegante, aunque diminuta y ahora muy vieja, llevando un pequeño paquete de compras. Pero no le hablo por timidez y el hecho de que casi seguramente no me recordaría, a quien tuvo en su clase de francés de 5º grado hace casi 40 años, pero también por terror, ya que daba clases con tal ferocidad, expresando, supongo, una apasionada creencia en su rectitud, la superioridad, la perfección de pie sobre pie y monte sobre monte, que me hacía la vida imposible, hasta que una noche, mientras iba a caballo a la casa de mis abuelos en el pueblito, en los montes de Auckland llamado Piedmont, sentí el repentino placer de triunfo que llega a vincular una cosa con la otra, la emoción de producir sentido. Vivimos en un estado relativo, con sensaciones preposicionales. En el show porno vi que, paradójicamente, cada mujer escondía su pubis afeitándoselo, sentada en una silla, de noche, vestida con una ropa vieja, en la mesa junto a la ventana, mirando hacia afuera, durante una tormenta, vi al viento volcando sobre los árboles bajo las luces en la calle. El esquizofrénico, observando algo, lo ve convertirse no solo en extraño, sino en irreal. Pero la mirada artística y el resultante extrañamiento eleva lo palpable de la cosa, lo ve, en vez, no solo como extraño, sino como real. Hay altruismo en la poesía. Al amanecer, el viento al sol es el color de la noche derramada, pero los montes están ennegrecidos, las casas perdidas, y la ciudad se estira, fundada en nombre del obispo George Berkeley, en honor a su frase, el imperio toma su curso hacia el oeste. El conocimiento se corporiza y el cuerpo está temblando, aterrorizado, porque no está listo, olvidó prepararse, olvidó comprar la comida, olvidó vestirse. Y entonces, para creer qué es lo que realmente creemos que es, debemos abrirlo. Para tener dos veces mis momentos en palabras, me retuerzo. Me encuentro se encuentra a sí mismo, o mejor, no puede encontrarse a sí mismo y avanza, mirándose a sí mismo. El oeste está acá. No podemos bastar nuestras incertidumbres en ninguna otra cosa.
Wow. Patricio, thank you. This was so moving somehow. This has been a very long reading. I really appreciate everyone's endurance, perseverance, care, patience, presence. Not to hog the mic, but I really think we can't say goodbye today without hearing Arkady Dragomoshenko, the one translator with whom it all began, both for Lyn, but also today, and because I'm also really sorry that Alexander Skidan wasn't able to do his part and read this translation. So this is what I'm going to close with. We heard this read in English by Charles Bernstein at the very beginning. Here is the English text again, chapter 109 from Ochota, A Change of Season. And I'll read to you in Russian Arkady Dragomoshenko's translation of this poem by Lyn, which is itself comprised entirely of Arkady's letters to Lyn. Глава 109. Смена времен года. Итак, совершенно волшебным образом случилось, что в одно прекрасное и бесконечное утро моим достоянием стала множественность широко распахнутых окон и солнца, льющегося в расщелины едва видимой яркости. Почему бы в этом не видеть особенный смысл? Материя, сущность, стала столь невесомой, что не в состоянии была впитывать более сырость, аккумулировать влагу, поэтому ветер беззвучно несет ее мимо нефритовой чешуи, плывущей между ветвями цветущей сосны над простертой Невской водой, не отражающей ничего, не ощущающей ничего. 4 дня жары пролетело. И впрямь, возможно ли, что только 4? Что до меня, то, вопреки законам меланхоличного чередования и смены дней, ни завершения, ни конца нельзя было вычленить из того часа, когда я вернулся домой и растянул на балконе в виде тента кусок полотна, который с тех пор хлопает на ветру, несмотря на то, что знаки зноя и первые приметы духоты стали гораздо очевидней, и невыносимо белое солнце повисло неподвижно в стронцианово-лазурном пыльном небе, вместе с тем неуловимо смещаясь к неким границам, слишком умозрительным, чтобы позволить одно отличить от другого, день от ночи, и саму ночь, в любом случае схожую со свечой, горящей поутру. И наступи к 10 вечера, она исполнила бы комнату первыми лучами духоты, шафранно-желтым кипением, от которого не спас бы и жалкий тент, всхлипнувший, лишь только ветер изменил направление, и целиком рухнувший вниз в ветви деревьев. Это напоминает мне жонглера, который жонглировал в церкви плодами, поскольку у него не было иного языка. Ощущение безумной ясности на всех уровнях сменялось пульсирующим жаром его рук, хищно движущихся к некой материализации, подобной языку, невзирая на отчетливое чувство неуверенности, касавшихся предметов, до той поры, покуда в них отпадала потребность. В эту изумительную брешь безмолвия, в неустанно разрастающееся зияние максимального давления, гасившее то, что он называл счастьем, вечером первого дня голову расколола головная боль. Я провел всю ночь на балконе, не предвидя ни конца ее, ни рассвета, ни моей головной боли, которая стала плоской и прямой, под стать тропе, ведущей к определенным условиям, о которых трудно что-либо сказать, разве что они не имеют ничего общего с временем. На следующий день я проехал в метро, пересел в автобус и вскоре был у озер, где за зарослями сирени наткнулся на заброшенное корто, засыпанное раскаленной бледно-серой хвоей. Я просто лег на песок и уснул. Я видел во сне. Однако существует опасность в том, что повествуемая жизнь превратится в приключение, а каждое приключение неумолимо движется к разрешению. Но как я могу сказать, что не люблю приключений? Сейчас я думаю о поразительной древности, ощущения того, что это происходит. Thank you, everyone. This was the obvious analogy is with music, an international celebration of the 84th birthday of the poet Lyn Hejinian. You've heard Lyn Hejinian read in English by friends, collaborators, publishers from the US and elsewhere, as well as in world languages by translators and editors in Russian, Serbian, Polish, Chinese, Spanish, many more, 2 more to mention here. Thank you for being with us. Happy birthday, Lyn. That's all for now. I'm ending the recording.